Sorry, I'm starting to record, but I just want to stop the transcription because otherwise it drives us crazy. Transcription stopped, and now we're only recording. All right. So welcome, ladies and gents. Let's see what we can do to assist you today. You've still got lots of time, in my opinion, to prepare for the actual exam. So good. Um, yeah, I don't know. There's all these chats now. I'm just happy that I can see your chats, hopefully, is what I can see here. So just let's make sure we've got it all set up as well. I just want to be sure. I want to see chats. I don't want to see who's here. I just want to see, can I see you when you, there we go. All right. So I don't know what that 1 to 116 is about, but nevertheless, let's worry about that. Let's just get on with what we've got here. And hopefully, as long as you can hear me and you can see the slides, we're good to go. A couple of things that we've got to look at is just in terms of house rules. All right, so let's just go and have a look. The speak function has been deactivated, and that's mainly because we spend a lot of time otherwise having to tell people to mute. So it's much easier to keep it muted. And that's why we've kept the chat function so that you can talk to me and ask me questions in that chat function. If I can just ask you to follow the process in terms of chats, is try and keep it related to what we're dealing with. What you can do is when we take a break, which we'll take obviously at the end of each hour, we'll take a break and then you're welcome to ask any other questions that you want to ask. It just makes it a little bit more streamlined and it keeps us engaged on what's going on in front of us. All right, so please repeat, try and keep your questions to the sections that we're actually dealing with at any point in time. The other thing that I want to urge you to be aware of is that we've got to go fairly fast. If I'm going too fast, you can just ask me to slow down a little bit. But if we want to get through what we're going to get through today, it's going to be kind of critical to keep on a time schedule. If, for whatever reason, the recording goes crazy, because we've had that with Teams very often in the past, we think it's recording and then we go and discover that it hasn't recorded the whole thing. Our session is quite long, so that's often when the trouble comes in. If that does happen, then what we'll do is we'll make sure that we send a PDF version of the slides to your lecturers and that at least you can get the slides. So even if you don't get the recording, you'll be able to get those slides. All right. So apologies in advance if there is any problem with the recordings, but I know in the past we've often had those issues. All right. I will be keeping tabs because I'm on my own here. I will be keeping tabs on the chats. I may miss some of them, but then I will always go back at the end of a session. I'll go back and have a look and see what I missed, and I'll then answer. So if your question gets a bit lost because you see lots of chats coming through, then just re-ask your question, and I'll pick it up at some point. All right. DP, that's what I've just been explaining, is that after the session, we then go and check the recordings, we download them, and then we send them to the various campuses. We send the links to the various campuses, and the campuses will then distribute to the students. Personally, I usually try and send it to the lecturers themselves, because then the lecturers are able to put it up onto ARC or to get it to you much more efficiently. So that's what we hope. Unfortunately, I know Monday is a public holiday, so that does complicate it a bit. But I'll try and get it through to everyone this afternoon, and then they'll be able to distribute. All right. So take screenshots and whatever as we go, so that there will be some sections where I say, please make sure you can do this or make sure you can answer these questions. And then maybe screenshots are useful because then that will remind you that's what we need to go and have a look at. All right. That'll help you to at least have something just in case the link never gets to you. All right, so let's see first of all, format of the paper. I'm sure your lecturers have all told you, but just a reminder, section A, section B, section C. You can see A, 30 marks, B, 30 marks. A, I think, is likely to be MCQs and true-false type questions, so it'll be those very short questions. Section B is likely to be distinguished between identify and probably very theoretically based. So there's quite a lot of marks for you to get in pure theory, because if you could get a majority of that 30 marks for pure theory, and that's why I urge students to always learn their theory, because that can save you enormously. And then section C is going to be your application more than likely. So here you may have some theory, but you're also going to have a strong element of application. All right, so let's just check. I'm checking. Yep. People can, yeah, they can. So DP, okay, so let me just respond to him. Responding to the person who can't hear. Right. All right, we'll get there in a moment. The question from which sections? We'll get there in a moment. I'll tell you in a sec. Remember, you were given the briefing on your intranet, the student intranet. It was uploaded. Just an advisory, watch out for those sections where there's heavy mark allocation. Make sure you really know them well, because that's obviously where your in-depth questions are going to come from. The rest is quite significant if you total it. So if you take learning unit 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 and 9, there's quite a substantial amount of marks still that are coming from those learning units, but just not as heavy as your 5, 6, 8 and 10. All right. So looking at where we're going to go today, let's go and take a look. A reminder that you've got enough time still. Remember, obviously, you've got to look at learning unit 7 and 10, or 7 to 10. You haven't been tested on that before. So please remember, you've got to spend a bit more time on that. So I estimate about 10 hours. And then for learning unit 1 through to 6, I estimate about 8 hours. So that gives you from now to Monday, I would say Monday morning, because you want to keep some time just for final revision, gives you about 18 hours. And if you really put in a dedicated 18 hours, you're going to crack this exam. But it's got to be what I'm going to warn you about now. It's got to be active engagement. All right. So you've got to actively engage with your information. You need to make sure that you find ways that you can keep that info in your head, and then you want to test yourself. Do I know it? And testing yourself doesn't mean that you have to go and answer formal question papers. It just means that you need to test yourself. So once you've studied a section, cover it up, put it aside, and see, what do I remember from what I've studied? Because if you don't, you're going to end up in the test or exam discovering you don't know it. All right. So a little bit of advice there from somebody who's been around a long, long time. That will help you with ecos. Students often ask me, how should I study economics? It is different to business management. All right. Similar to accounting, but different to business management. So it needs a very different approach than you would use for business management. Pencil and paper, please. This is active learning. This is not just where you sit and look at the screen and hope that some of it will get in your head. This is where you have a pencil and paper ready and you start making your notes. And that doesn't mean that you write down everything you see, all right? So Renske Engelbrecht, I have already given the message on that. We will distribute the slides. At best, we will have the recording and the slides. At worst, you will have the slides. So you will get them at some point. They will be distributed to your lecturers, and your lecturers will then be able to upload them for you onto ARC. So they will go. Yes, so that's what I've just been saying. You need active learning, JM. You need to be able to learn actively. So this means that you can't just sit staring at your paper or writing notes. All right. What you have to do is find a way that stimulates your engagement. And that might be drawing pictures, it might be doing mind maps, it might be walking and talking, as I say to my students. Walk the talk, walk up and down and explain concepts to yourself. And then close your book, put it aside and see. Take a piece of paper and see, what can I remember? All right. Yeah, absolutely. Walk the talk. Learn actively. So important for ecos, because otherwise the stuff just doesn't stick in your head. All right. Let's go and see. Now, for the question that was asked, what are we going to do? We're going to start with a very, very quick test for you. I'm going to give you a minute now on your pieces of paper. I don't want to see it on the chat line, all right? I'm not asking you to come in on the chat line. What I'm asking you to do at home, where you're sitting, is see how many equilibriums you've learned. This is what I did with my students yesterday when we did the booster on campus. How many equilibriums have you learned? Can you remember how many it is, and can you write down some of them? I'm going to give you 1 minute to do that. And then we're going to show you what you should be able to do. All right, so giving you 1 minute to do that. All right, let's go see. What should you have been able to get? Now, I would have expected most students at this point to be able to get at least 4. All right, let's show you how many there actually are. That's how many there are. So you can see that there are, I think it's 7 of them on that page. They're all important for the final exam. All right, and the reason why I focus on this initially, aside from learning unit 1 and 2, which is essentially just theory and more macroeconomics based, from learning unit 3, these equilibriums start to play into your knowledge. So if you know the equilibrium and understand it, we can then assume you know everything that goes into that equilibrium. All right. So that is why I use this as a reference point for students, because if you don't know them, chances are you're in a little bit of trouble because you haven't learned enough. You need to be able to go in, you need to be able to explain it, you need to be able to draw it, you need to be able to apply it. All right, so that's my warning to you when you are approaching economics. It also helps to give you an objective in mind. Do I understand this equilibrium? Can I get to it? Can I explain it? We're going to get asked on at least 2 or 3 of these equilibriums in the final exam. We don't know which ones, but they're going to be there. All right. So where are we going to start? We're going to start with learning unit 3 and 4. Now, when I did my class yesterday on campus, I started with 7, 8, 9, and 10. But then I decided, actually, we need to clarify and warn you students that there's a couple of things that you're going to be tested on in these earlier learning units that we need to be sure that you are clear on. So I'm going to do 3 and 4, then I'm going to do 5 and 6 because they are 2 of the heavy mark allocations, and then we will go on to 7, 8, 9, and 10. And then if we have time, we will go back to 1 and 2. All right, so 1 and 2 are important in terms of theory, but most of you did okay in test 1, so chances are you kind of got that stuff. So we don't really need to spend much time on there. Now, I'm going to go through this not to explain to you how it works. Remember, this is not teaching. We're not teaching now. What we're doing is we're saying, watch out for this. Can you do this? All right. So this is an alert to you. Once again, if you've got questions on it and there is a little bit of more detail you need, you're welcome to put it into the chat. But the main focus here must be, what must I know? Let's go take a look. First thing, you've got to be able to do all of this. All right. And you'll notice that I've headed this basics of demand. You cannot answer any questions on demand if you don't know these basics. All right. So you've got to be able to define demand. And that means learning the definition off by heart, yes, but also paying attention to the terminology. Remember, you've got to have willing and able. In a definition of demand, we have to be willing and able. You must know or be able to state the law of demand. Now, by now, most of you should have that. You may not be able to state it word perfectly, but you've got a pretty good idea in your head what it is. Make sure you can state it, all right? And then the one that you're going to be tested on, folks, is your determinants of demand. What are the determinants of demand and how do they affect demand? All right, so you've got your letters PX, PG, Y, T, N, and dot, dot, dot. You don't have to necessarily be totally comfortable with the equation as such, but what you must know is what those letters stand for and what they do. So we've got PX, of course, which is the price of the actual specific product. You've got PG, which is the price of complements and substitutes. You've got Y, which is the income of consumers. T, consumer tastes, preferences. And then you've got N, which is number of consumers. And you've got your dot, 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 which is your other factors, all right? Now you've got to be able to differentiate between those determinants. What causes a shift of the demand curve and what causes the change in quantity demanded, which is a movement along the curve. Pay attention to these rules. If you learn these rules, you'll be able to answer the questions, all right? Notice that supply does not impact on demand. So don't give us supply. When we ask you what are the determinants of demand, don't tell us supply. because you're going to lose your marks. It's not one of the determinants of demand. This brings us to that last point on the previous slide. Do you know the difference between a change in quantity demanded and a change in demand? Quantity demanded, movement along your demand curve, which is caused by one thing and one thing only, a change in price, which is PX, and then your shifting of your demand curve, which is a change in demand. An increase is a shift to the right, a decrease is a shift to the left. Those are rules. Learn them, be able to apply them. So that's your demand pretty much done. Then comes the same for supply. Basics of supply. Can you define supply? Do you know the determinants of supply? Now, generally speaking, let me just double check that. This is exactly what I was talking about in terms of this recording. Who the hang knows why? It is just the oddest thing ever. So, no, it looks like from my side, it looks like it's still recording. So I'm not sure what it's doing, but this is exactly why I'm going to send out the slides anyway, because we just don't know. On my side, it indicates that it's still recording. All right, so ladies and gents, now we want to go and have a look, just going back quickly to the slide on supply, having a look at that again. Just a reminder, once again, the rules are much the same as demand. What will cause a shift of the supply curve are your determinants, everything except PX. The price of the product will cause a movement along. So let's go take a look at that. And students, just a reminder, students often battle with supply. You tend not to battle with demand, but you battle with supply. So just a reminder of how it works. So looking at this now, what happens when we are looking at a supply relationship? The relationship between price and quantity supplied is a positive relationship. What does that mean? It means that as your price increases, so your quantity also increases. Remember, your supplier always wants the highest possible price. So there's a positive relationship there between the quantity supplied and the price. You should know that by now, but just a reminder, just in case you had forgotten that. All right. Looking at the next one, moving on. There we go, movement along, change in quantity supplied. Onto the next slide. Change in supply, in this case, decrease in supply, shift to the left, always a decrease, and this was your PF. So anything other than the price of the product, all right. So looking at that, ladies and gents, a little bit of the basics, and that, of course, brings us to the next really important thing in Learning Unit 3 and 4, which you are probably going to be tested on, and that is market equilibrium and market forces. All right, so how they're going to test this, well, we don't know for sure, but let's have a look at the two possible ways that it could be tested. You must understand that market equilibrium is the interaction of demand and supply, and this is, of course, referred to as the operation of or the market mechanism or operation of market forces. All right. So looking at what you need to know about equilibrium, folks, can you describe equilibrium? Can you describe market equilibrium? And then when does disequilibrium occur? So these are basis of multiple choice questions or even brief 2-mark, 3-mark questions asking you to explain what is a situation of disequilibrium. Would you be able to tell us? Then you can get specific. Disequilibrium is, of course, when we're not at equilibrium. And then, of course, we have two possible situations that could arise when we are not at equilibrium. Let's take a look at that. So 2 questions they can ask you. What if, when we are at equilibrium, what if something changes? Or they can ask you, how do we get to equilibrium? All right. All right, so looking at, I just get distracted obviously every now and then by the chats. I just want to check Keenan Smith. Audio and visuals aren't working. I think that's not the case. They both are working. But if one of the other students who is able to see and hear can just send a message to Keenan, I'd be grateful because obviously I can't tell whether, okay, thanks Josh. Great. So Keenan hopefully will see your message and he'll get to work that out as well. All right, so getting to equilibrium, what we do is we have equilibrium here, but now we've got to explain how do we get there. Now, this is potentially what they could ask you in that exam, all right. So then you start with a price that's higher than equilibrium, and you tell us what will happen. If the price is too high, we have excess supply. What will happen as a result? There will be downward pressure on that price. Will we get to equilibrium automatically? Well, we don't know. We might, but we might not. That would be a disequilibrium position. All right. So if we're at P1, we're in disequilibrium. What sort of disequilibrium? It is excess supply or surplus. What happens if the price is too low? This is also disequilibrium position, but this is excess demand, and it will put upward pressure on the price. So that would be the story you would need to tell. Should they ask you this question? How is equilibrium established in the market? Now, they may not ask you for the diagram. They may just ask you to give the explanation. All right. And then you start with, if the price is too high, what will happen? If the price is too low, what will happen? Until eventually we get to equilibrium. Super nice, simple. Keep it simple. All right. Don't overcomplicate. This takes us to the what if. So now we're going to ask you questions. Now I'm going to ask you to jump in on the chat line. So now we're in equilibrium, but now we want to know what is going to happen to that equilibrium position if, question 1, the product in this market goes out of fashion. So please do tell us what will happen, which curve will shift, and which way. Thanks, Josh, for giving that good advice. Yeah, I agree. I think that's a smart bit of insight there. All right, Luke, yes, demand goes left. Absolutely. Well done, Luke. Thank you for the answer there. What does it mean when the product in this market goes out of fashion? It means that tastes have changed. And that will cause a shift. And of course, if the people don't want it anymore, the demand curve is going to shift to the left. And then just remember to answer in the question what happens to the equilibrium price and what happens to the equilibrium quantity. So if we wanted to go and put that in, let's quickly get a color here. So what we would do is we would shift our demand curve, there it goes, to the left, and then we can very quickly tell what has happened to our equilibrium. And please, students, don't forget to mark in the equilibrium price and quantity. I notice a lot of students forget, they don't put it in, and then you lose marks. All right, so you've shifted it correctly, but then you don't go and put in your actual information, so you don't show us what's happened. So you want to make sure that what you do, you don't have to put in the little arrows, but what you do need to do is mark the position for us so that we can see that you understand that the price has decreased. Equilibrium price has decreased and equilibrium quantity has also decreased. All right, so that was question 1. Let's just erase that all so that we can look at question 2. So meanwhile, sorry, but yeah, staring at a blank screen for 2 hours with no visuals and no words, I would agree, absolutely. Question 2, yep, shift to the state of technology for producing this product improves. Let's say supply shifts right, be a more efficient, supply increases, absolutely. So do you see how simple it can be, ladies and gents? You can see from the responses that we're getting from the students there, that once you know and understand that equilibrium position and you understand those basics that I've shown you, you can deal with any question that they ask you because you'll be able to work it out. All right, so if supply, let's quickly go and shift supply. Just a quick, I'm assuming you can see these little drawings that I'm making on the screen. Just give me a quick feedback. Brilliant. Okay. So there my supply curve shifts to the right. And now what we do is we go in and we say, okay, what's happened to my equilibrium? We can see equilibrium price has decreased. So remember, we got put it in, even though it looks like a grade 1's drawings. I know because it is quite hard to get it accurate here. All right. But you know what to do. All right. So, oh, so shame, Josh. Again, it's so weird. I just don't get this thing. I mean, it just is so irritating. You have no idea. So irritating. Yeah. So Josh, for JM, I think, I don't know if that's Josh, JM. I just showed the supply curve shifting to the right. All right. You kind of got that, I think, anyway. So unfortunately, I don't actually understand unless you're on your phone versus on the computer. I don't know if that makes a difference. But Jason, thanks, Jason. Yeah, so I don't know what it is that's causing that, but I'll try and always back up whatever I'm doing with verbal, so then at least you can hear it. All right. So that was the shift of the supply curve to the right for question 2. All right, so that gives you an idea of the kind of question. Now I'm going to actually show you questions in previous. Yes, absolutely, we have. Yeah, everybody's got well, we've got reasonable access. I did notice that it did warn that some people who come from external, in other words, if you haven't come through your VC connection, that what happens is you don't have access to all the things that are happening. And that part, I'm not sure. That's an IT issue. But as far as I'm aware, everybody's been granted the access that they need. All right, so now let's show you questions that actually were asked. Let's go and show you. So I'm going to ask you to read that question through. I've given you the answer, but before you look at the answer, just have a look at the question, and then I'm going to point out to you what was critical when you were reading that question in the exam. All right, so read it through quickly. All right, so when you get a question like this in the exam, you want to go and have a look at a few things. So first of all, notice explain and draw. We find a lot of students draw and they forget to explain. They very seldom forget to draw the graph, but they often draw the graph and then they forget to explain. Listen, right or wrong, if you've drawn a graph, you can explain it because you just tell us what you've done. All right. So rather give that explanation, just don't forget, because otherwise you're going to end up losing at least half of the marks. The next thing was you notice it says market for beef. As soon as it says market, you've got to have a demand and a supply curve. All right. Then notice now you've got to be careful because it's talking about two products. It says in the market for beef, if there is a decrease in the price of pork. Now they could ask you for both graphs, but in this case they haven't. They've asked you only for the market for beef. So we don't want to see the graph for pork. We just want to see what's going to happen to beef. Now, pork is a substitute in consumption, so that tells us that this has to be demand. If it was a substitute in production, then that would tell us that it has to be supply. All right. So substitute in consumption tells us that it is the demand that is going to be affected. And now we go in and we have a look and see, okay, so what is the story? And there is, so pork, let's see what you said, price goes down. We must be specific. So be careful when we are talking in the chats. You need to make sure that price goes down, quantity demanded goes down. Demand goes down. Be careful, Uyama. Just be careful of that. We want to talk demand, all right? Not quantity demanded. No change in supply, absolutely. Quantity supplied goes down, yeah, because we're moving down the supply curve. So be careful of that because that's where you're going to lose marks because we're going to be critical on that, all right? Pork is a substitute, so if pork price decreases, this will affect beef because people want more pork, absolutely, due to the law of demand. But remember, we're more interested in beef. So don't give me too much of a spiel on pork. Give me a bit more of a spiel on what is happening in the market for beef. All right. So those are the things that, thank you for that participation because it helps to give me a little bit of insight, and then I can give you information which can help everyone in that exam. Be careful to focus on the market that has been asked. So you can tell me that more people will want pork, and therefore the demand for beef will decrease. Because remember, beef is where we want to focus our explanation. All right. So little things like that, which will help you get those full marks if that's what you're aiming for in your exam. Yeah, absolutely. And then equilibrium, absolutely, equilibrium. So always remember to talk, Nathan, just a reminder, remember to talk equilibrium because now we're talking equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. All right, so a little bit of clarity there in your explanations. All right, supply and demand together. So now it's not often that they ask. Thanks, Jason. Yeah, that's what I'm aiming for. All right. Supply and demand change simultaneously. Look, they don't often ask this question, but they do on occasion. So let's show you what they did ask. So there was your 2019 paper. These are some other questions. 2019 is the one that's relevant here. Farmer Brown is a wine farmer. He has approached you to give him some advice. There's a lot happening in the wine industry, and he needs some clarity on how these changes will affect the market for wine. The following changes have occurred simultaneously. The price of grapes used in production of wine has increased, and research results have recently been published that prove that wine is healthy and that a glass a day is beneficial. So this was the question in the exam, and then they asked you to go in and draw the graph and explain what had happened. So the first thing you do now is identify. Price of grapes used in the production of wine has increased. That is an input, which the cost of which has increased, and therefore that will be supply. So supply will shift to the left, a decrease in supply. At the same time, research results have recently been published that prove wine is healthy, that is demand, and that will cause the demand curve to shift to the right. All right, so that would be your first step here, is you must know that you've got two curves that are shifting. Please, a strong word of advice to all of you. The previous question that we looked at only gave you information on demand. Always check your question. Is it asking for both to shift, or is it only giving you information on one of them to shift? Be very, very careful, because a lot of students just shift all the curves just sommer through, but don't do that. All right, so read your question. In this case, we are going to shift both curves, and we're going to see what the outcome is. 2022 we'll have a look at just now, because that's government intervention. We haven't got there yet. All right. Hence, read carefully. Absolutely. So there was your suggested solution to the 2019 question. Notice my supply curve has shifted to the left. My demand curve has shifted to the right. You can see that by S to S1 and DO to D1. And then my equilibrium position has moved from EO to E1. So now what has happened in this case? In this case, the quantity, the equilibrium quantity, has remained the same. The price has definitely increased. So what we can say for sure is that the equilibrium price will go up. But what we don't know for sure is what's going to happen to the equilibrium quantity. And that is what they would expect you to explain. All right. So watch out for that. You can get most of your marks, but just by shifting your curves correctly and explaining what has happened. Even if you forget that little bit about the uncertainty, you're still going to get most of your marks in answering this question accurately. All right. So that was one of your questions in 2019. And then, as I said to you, this was the 2022 question, which was a simple question. It was one of the easiest ones you could get, which was asking about government intervention in the market. So it asked about a minimum price. What happens if government implements a minimum price? But that's what we're going to go and have a look at now. All right, so we're going to go and look at government intervention quickly and see what they could ask you there. Now, folks, remember, keep it simple. Keep it simple, keep it straightforward. Make sure you can answer these kind of basic questions before you worry about the more complex. It is my theory. You guys can prove me right or wrong. It is my theory, though, that if you understand the basics, you will be able to work out the more complicated questions. All right. So let's have a look at the basics of government intervention. How does government intervene in the markets? Well, you've learned that there are actually four ways. They can do maximum price or minimum price. They can also do taxes and subsidies. We do not study taxes and subsidies in microeconomics. All right. We focus on maximum price and minimum price. Sorry, ma'am, but is this exam, Jason, not so much necessary. Well, you've asked a good question there. Jason says, does this exam base more on understanding the graphs? The reason that understanding the graphs is important is because you're able to answer more questions. It's not necessarily that they're going to ask you on the graph specifically, but what happens is we find that if students understand the theory, learn the theory, and then can apply it in the graphs, they do much better. And that is because your ability then to understand the more difficult questions is intact. All right, so that's really the answer there. The graphs, they may not ask you that many graphs in the actual exam. They may ask you only one or two of them. But what they're going to do is ask you questions that are based on, do you understand those graphs? All right. Q is undetermined yeah, that's it. So looking at that previous question, yeah, you're absolutely. Thanks, understand the theory, then can apply. They do so much better, absolutely. Which two do we focus on? Okay, so Rook, I'm just not sure what you are asking there. So just a little bit, how do we know? Are you talking textbook, Baptista? Oh, are you talking to Nathan? All right, so you're giving him, okay, good. Thanks for answering that question. Oh, yes, which two government intervention? Yeah, remember we've got the four. So yeah, thanks, Baptista. Thanks so much for doing that. But we introduced this chat when this section is introduced in chapter four, in chapter 5, I think it is at the end of chapter 5. They introduce you to the 4 different types of government intervention, but we actually only study 2. All right, we study maximum prices and minimum prices. All right, so you've got to, now this could be your question that they ask you. Got nothing to do with graphs. They could simply ask you what happens when government intervenes in the market. And this is what you've got to tell us. It interferes with market forces. Equilibrium cannot be established. We are forced into a disequilibrium position. Then you might be able to tell me 1 or 2 of the consequences. In other words, if it's a maximum price, we're going to be forced into a shortage. If it's a minimum price, we're going to be forced into a surplus. And then you could be required to discuss the welfare costs. All right, so these are the answers that might come up to a question, what happens when government intervenes? And it would all depend on the mark allocation. If it's for 10 marks, then you've got to tell me a lot of stories. If it's for 2 marks, you just got to tell me it interferes with market forces and it's going to cause disequilibrium. And then give me an example of disequilibrium. All right. So looking at that, that's the kind of question which would be really theory. But by understanding the graphs, it's going to help you immensely to be able to answer that theory question. So we're going to go on, ask you 2 questions quickly. I'm not going to ask you to put it in the chat. I'm just going to ask you to sit at home now and see, can you answer these 2 questions? Give 2 reasons why government should be advised against setting price ceilings in a particular market. Now, think about it for a moment and see if you can work out what that answer should be. And then I'll tell you what it should be. It's only 2 marks, so not a big deal, but great if you can answer it. All right, so let me put in the chat here. What are your 2 reasons? Price ceiling. And you could give me something like this. Now, this is not the only answer at all, but this could be something that you could give us. Price ceiling is a maximum price and it will cause a shortage in the market. Many consumers will not be able to purchase this product because that's what's going to happen. That's what a shortage means. It means that many of the consumers who now want to and still need this product will not be able to purchase it. You could add in there quantity demanded will increase, quantity supplied will decrease, and that will give rise to far fewer products in the market, which means that consumers are disadvantaged. All right. So that's what you want to be able to tell us as a consequence. Remember, because we're not now looking at the reasons for it, we're looking at what will happen if they implement a maximum price, and therefore why should it not be a situation. You could also just tell us it will cause a disequilibrium situation of a shortage in the market. Once again, what does that mean? Consumers will not be able to enjoy the product that they wanted. All right, so important to use a little bit of common sense there, as well as the theory that you've learned. Then your second question, briefly explain how government setting a price floor. Can we also mean Megan, the quality of the product wouldn't really be the issue here. That is a possibility that could happen going forward, but it's not an immediate. So that's what I say when I say keep it simple. Keep it simple and keep it basic, because as soon as you wander off track, then what happens is you may be overcomplicating and then you confuse yourself and you also may lose marks. All right. So keep it simple and direct. That will save you. But thanks for that, because that helps us understand what we mean by simple and direct. Briefly explain how government setting a price floor, minimum price below the equilibrium price, will affect the market for a particular good. Now, I want you to answer that question for me. Minimum below, what does it do? What's the single word you can tell me? Let's see. I want to see if you fall in the trap now. Rather fall in the trap now than in the exam. Minimum price below. And what is the single word that I want? Aha, that's what I wanted. Nothing. It does nothing. It is useless. It doesn't work. It has no effect on the market. All right. Why? Because a minimum price must be above. All right. So that's an important one. They love asking that kind of question. Remember, maximum, if it's set above, it will not affect the market. Minimum, if it is set below, it will not affect the market. Well done. So let's have a quick look at the graphs now so that we can actually see. There's your PMAX, your price ceiling. Remember, it's also called price control. It's got 3 different names: maximum price, price ceiling, or ceiling price, price control. All right. It will result in a disequilibrium position known as a shortage. If we go to minimum price, above equilibrium, helps producers, also known as price support and price floor. All right. So different names. Don't get confused if they use different names asking you about these government intervention. All right. Those are your easy ones. So there's your easy stuff. But now comes the more difficult one. Let's go have a look. What if they ask you the welfare costs of government intervention? What now? All right. So here I've given you once again the basics. Once again, keep it simple. First thing about welfare costs. It is the cost to society. All right. So that's not on the screen. So you may want to make a note of that. Welfare costs are the cost to society when government intervenes. Notice I say cost. That means it is a negative. Benefits would be a positive. Cost is a negative. All right. So these are the negative effects that society suffers when government intervenes. First of all, you've got to be able to work with a change in consumer and producer surplus. Who loses? Who gains? With a maximum price. Tell me quickly. Who loses? Maximum price set below equilibrium to help who? So who gains? Who gains for maximum price? You can tell me now in the chat if you think you know. There we go. Consumers, brilliant. You're halfway there. You're halfway there to answering any questions that are going to be asked on this. Consumer gains, producer loses. If we go to minimum price, we ask the same question. Who loses, who gains? Minimum price, producers are going to win and consumers are going to gain. There we go. Absolutely. So you've all got this. You've got this, you know. Absolutely. So a little bit of basic stuff, which is going to keep you on track. All right. So now they ask you about a graph. Okay, so let's go in to a starting position. Remember this from Learning Unit 3. You learned this at the end of Learning Unit 3. Once you had studied demand and supply, you had to go and study consumer surplus and producer surplus. So just a quick reminder, they could ask you a simple question like this. Distinguish between consumer surplus and producer surplus. But more important now is how does government intervention impact on these? Because that's what they're testing you on in this last section in Learning Unit 4. All right, so let's go and have a look. So remember, your consumer surplus is all that area above the market price, but below the demand curve, while producer surplus is below the market price, but above the supply curve. All right, so remember those because you're going to need them when you go to the next diagram. All right, so let's go and have a look. Look at this one. We want to now show the welfare costs of a maximum price. All right, so let's go. Maximum price we know is below. So there comes my P max. First thing we do is identify the quantity that can be exchanged. In other words, this is the quantity that will be bought and sold. We can see it is different to our original equilibrium quantity. So QM is much less than Q1. What does this mean? It means that we've lost A and we've lost B. What does that tell us? Or what are those losses? Let's go have a look. A and C is a dead weight loss. That means nobody gets it. Not the consumer, not the supplier. So the supplier will not produce it, the consumer will not consume it. All right, so that is what the dead weight loss means. A is lost to consumer surplus. C is lost to producer surplus. Now, it doesn't matter what you label these. A, B, C, X, Y, Z, N, Q, F, whatever you want to label them, it doesn't matter. They're just giving us a source of reference so that when you tell us the story, you can refer to A and B and C and D and E and F. All right. So there you have area A and area C. Now, the one that students mostly struggle with is this last one, because what happens to that little section B? It has now moved from the producer to the consumer. And that is why we say the consumer gains, because the producer is losing that part of their producer surplus, but the consumer is gaining that. All right. So that is where you can now learn this off by heart, if you must, or try and understand it. If you can understand it, it's so much easier to remember. But if you're struggling with that, then just try and learn it off by heart. All right. So sometimes they do ask this question in the exam. I don't know if it will be in this time, but you must decide. Do you want to take a risk and not learn this a challenging graph, or are you aiming for that 80, in which case you better learn it? All right. So that is for your maximum price. Then you do exactly the same for minimum price. So starting position, exactly the same. But where's my minimum price going? It's going above. There goes my minimum price. Once again, we identify QM, which is the quantity that will be bought and sold. You can see once again, it's less than equilibrium. What does this do to consumer and producer surplus? Well, first of all, we lose these sections. Now you can see my labels are different. Now it's B and C. B is still a loss to consumers, consumer surplus. C is a loss to producer surplus. And now the little section there has shifted from the consumer to the producer. So now the producer gains and the consumer loses. All right, so just in case you weren't altogether clear on that, they may not even ask you for the graphs. They may ask you to explain what will happen. What are the welfare costs involved when we implement a minimum price? All right, for me, the graphs serve as a tool to remember the story. So I find it much easier then to remember the story than if I was just trying to learn it automatically. All right. Right, we've got another few minutes to go before we go on break. So I'm going to just stop there after learning unit 3 and 4, and I'm just going to ask for a little bit of feedback from you very quickly. Do you feel that you've picked up some of the critical things that will be required for questions on those learning units? Brilliant. Thanks, folks. And also what you can see too from all of you is the more you engage with anything that you've got a concern about, the more advice I can give you. Because obviously once I can see how you're thinking, then I'm able to say, yeah, absolutely on par, that's what we want. And if you're wrong, I can say to you, watch out. I can help you a little bit there. All right. So now elasticities. Now notice 10 to 20% in the exam. The weighting is heavy on this section, all right, which tells me that I reckon there's going to be a calculation. The good thing is that you will have a formula sheet. But if you've seen the formula sheet, you'll see that it's only helpful if you know what you're looking for. All right, so be careful. Thank you so much, Jason. You're right. There is, and that's why I keep urging students to keep it basic and keep it simple, because you reduce the volume quite considerably. And suddenly you don't feel overwhelmed. You suddenly find, actually, I've got this. And then what you can do is as you go through it, you can add a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, which makes you then feel, I've got this. I actually know what I'm doing. So yeah, I hope it works for you all. We all want you to pass. Oh, there isn't a code, Bongeka. It's just the link. So if you can give them, if they are struggling, if you can give them the link that you've got, that you use to access, that would be what they should be able to use to get in. We haven't given any entrance codes. So it's not like they need specific permission to come in. Try that and see. If you do, just maybe it's the link that they haven't been able to find. And it could be just they're silly. And also tell them just if it's on their computer, there we go. Thanks so much, folks. Because I use a different access to what you guys and girls would have used. So if we can send that to anybody's friends, If you can, that will be great. And then they should be able to access. But failing that, they will get the recording or at least the slides anyway. All right, so last, I'm going to do another 2 minutes quickly, and then we'll go on break. What did I start with? I started with what you must know. First thing, please, what is the question asking for you? So they're going to ask you these questions. We don't know which ones, but they're going to. They're going to either ask you to define elasticity, or they're going to ask you about the types of elasticity, categories of elasticity, determinants of elasticity, the rules, or they're going to ask you to calculate, or a combination. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that you've got all of this. All right, so make sure you've got a screenshot of this, and then be sure that you can do all of these things. And then you'll suddenly find, actually, it's not so bad. And also, especially now that you don't have to or memorize the formulae. All right, so I'm going to remind you of this. This was your question in test 2. If you got them right, you're good to go, because you pretty much probably know what you're doing. If you got them wrong, this was 2 of the 3 questions. You actually had 3 questions there, because I also did the total revenue question, but I've left that one off for now. But you need to be able to do the calculation, and then you need to be able to identify. All right. Now, there was a clear distinction in test 2. Those students who were super able to do this and got full marks for it, and those students who were clueless and got it completely wrong. All right. You can't afford that in the exam, folks. You've got to be able to do it. All right. We'll look at the answer to this when we come back. I'm sure most of you know it already, but we'll double check the answers for that. And then from there, I'll take you into all of the elasticity. All right, so I'm going to mute. You're welcome to ask me questions in the chat. I'm going to mute. You can all go and grab a cup of tea or a glass of water or take a walk or whatever else you want to do, and we'll be back on the hour, all right, at 10 o'clock. Yes, you can give the answer for 5.1 if you've already calculated it. And Max, I will get back to you on that one, because that's what we're going to have a look at. A lot of people lost their marks there. So we'll definitely go and have a look at that. No, I just want to, I think you've rounded up too much. And based on what I gave you, you wouldn't be wrong because I didn't specifically say. No, no, it does say. Sorry, I did. Note, round off your answer to 2 decimal places. All right. So I don't know if they would have penalized you for that, but be careful because the answer was not 0.8. I know, and I think I know how you got there, but be careful. There we go. There we go. That's what it was, 0.77. So if you were rounding from there, then you may have lost a half a mark because it says very specifically round off to 2 decimal places. All right. Be really, really careful of that. You don't want to lose marks unnecessarily, especially if you've got the answer right. I'll wait till the end of the break and then I'll go back to, I'll show the answer on the screen for you. And then we'll talk about 5.2. All right. Okie dokes, folks. So, what to watch out for? Obviously, here, arc formula. Watch out. Do they say arc or do they say point? Otherwise, you're going to lose your marks. All right. So, we'll go and have a look at the answer now. And then we'll also talk about why a lot of people lost marks in 5.2 because it was out of 3 and they didn't answer it in enough detail. Let's go show you. So there was your ARC method using your formula. My students, I have taught another formula as well, which was also perfectly acceptable. So both formulas are acceptable, but you must get the right answer for both. All right. The negative was not necessary. If you didn't put in the negative, you did not lose marks, because remember, we were allowed to ignore the negative. But as I mentioned about that rounding, watch out. You've got to listen to the instructions. Otherwise, you may end up being penalized. All right. I don't know. I can't speak for all lecturers, but we are supposed to penalize you if you haven't listened to the instructions. So make sure that you don't round it any more than what is told to you. And then also be sure that you do round correctly. Remember, if it's 5, it's got to go up. Anything less than 0.76 must go to 7.7. 7.4 would stay at 7.4. All right. Yes, sure. Let's go back quickly to the question for you. There was your question. Let me get rid of the highlight there. There was your question. So you got it? All right. Okay. Back to answers now. We're good? Let's go. All right. There we are. So there was your question for 1. Yeah, absolutely. Round off to 2 decimal places. Yeah. Because a lot of students came in with 0.8, which is not incorrect in terms of rounding, but it doesn't apply the instructions. All right. So just be really careful of that. And then the question that everybody asked, why didn't they get their marks? So EP was less than 1. Yep, that's what we saw. Therefore, the demand for this product is inelastic. So if you said between 0 and 1, that's also fine. The product is inelastic. But then you had to also tell us what this means. Just looking at the question again, so I'm going to quickly go back there. It said, explain the category. Do you see the difference? If it just said identify the category, then you would have got your marks for EP is less than 1, therefore it is inelastic. But it said explain. So it's perhaps watching out what the question's actually asking you, and then always checking that mark allocation, because that's going to remind you. So back to it, and now you had to explain, what does this mean? This means that the percentage change in quantity demanded is less than the percentage change in price. All right, that's your explaining. All right, especially when you know it and you've got it right. And instead of getting full marks, you maybe end up, because if you had have just said it's inelastic, you would have only got 1 out of 3. And that's losing 2 marks, which for people who are trying to do well is real painful. All right, so please, silly things like that can cost you in the exam. All right, so what do we now need to know? Now we want to go back to that list that I gave you at the beginning, and we want to go and see, now, can we identify all these different things? So first thing is, what is elasticity? Can you define it? Defined as the percentage change in quantity demanded when the price changes by 1%. All right, that is the general definition of elasticity. Incorrect in many ways, actually, because it's only one of the types of elasticity, but it is what they give us in the textbook. All right, so that's where we start off. Then it goes into types of elasticity. So notice this is types. This is not categories. This is your types. So you've got elasticity of demand, elasticity of supply, and then under demand, you've got 3 different types of elasticity of demand. All right, make sure that you know that. You can describe them. You can apply the rules for them. You can calculate them. Once again, keep it simple. Then we're going to have a look at the actual formulae. Now, as we know, we're going to have a formula sheet, but we've got to be able to recognize. There's also a little bit of additional information that is useful when you're dealing with elasticity. A linear demand curve, that is a straight line demand curve, has a constant slope, that is mathematical knowledge, not economics, all right, but different elasticities at different points. You should all be aware that a straight line demand curve can illustrate or represent all 5 categories of elasticity, all right? So that's a little bit of extra information for you. And then the kind of question they ask you is going to test you on the slope of the curve and elasticity are not the same thing. The slope will help us to understand the elasticity, but it's not the same thing. Be careful of that. Then your two methods, your point method and your arc method. All right, so two important bits or bits of information, I think, is what I'm trying to say here, that you look for in your question. Is it the point method? Is it the arc method? If they do not tell you, then we have to accept either. But usually they will tell you, so look for it. So that is price elasticity of demand. Remember, EP, categories of price elasticity of demand. And then you also have categories of price elasticity of supply. I'm not dealing with that now. It's just as important. But what we do is we focus on the demand because there's way more that they can ask you on demand than what they ask you on supply, right? It doesn't mean it's not important. You must learn your categories of both, but they're very similar. So if we're looking at price elasticity of demand, these are now the categories, and there are 5 of them. And then I just say to students as well, please do also be sure that you know what they look like. So if we say to you EP is equal to naught, now that was one of the questions that, no, in fact, the question that was asked, I think is in the test was, what is unit elasticity? So they asked us, what is unit elasticity? And many people couldn't tell us. They told us that EP is equal to naught, but you can see that's not the case. EP is equal to 1. Learn this, folks. If you know all of these, there's very little they can ask you that you're not going to be able to answer on price elasticity of demand. All right. So very simple, 5 different categories, and then try and remember what do they look like, because that's going to help you remember. This one, perfectly inelastic, is vertical. Perfectly elastic is horizontal. All right, so that will also help you when you are studying that. All right, so that takes us through the categories. Next thing we said to you, watch out for. Oh, this is a question which they did ask on the categories. List the 5 categories of price elasticity of demand and state the effect of a price decrease on total revenue for each of these categories. So this is one of the more difficult, challenging questions. It's a combination of theory and application. Now, your theory will give you at least 5 out of 10, which is great for those of you just aiming to pass, because you'll be cool. You'll be able to. Your additional 5 marks to get closer to your 10 out of 10 is going to come from your understanding of your rules. All right, so let's have a look. What did the answer look like? There it was. There it is. So there's your 5 categories. Let's have a look at the 5 categories first. Perfectly inelastic, elastic, inelastic, unit elasticity, and perfectly elastic. So they were your categories based on pure learning. You got to learn those categories. And then was your interpretation. What will happen to total revenue if the price decreases? So what I would suggest for you now is take a screenshot of this and just be sure that if you are not comfortable yet with these rules, that you get comfortable with them. All right, because by learning this, it's going to help you with other questions they could potentially ask. And it will also help you, obviously, if they ask this one. But notice that this was a price decrease. So when you do your practice, then try and make sure, can I do it with a price increase as well? Can you do it both ways? All right, it'll be a useful little test for you to do for yourself to see if you've really understood this. This is where those rules come from, because this is showing you the price elasticity and the total revenue, the rules. Once again, are they going to ask you to draw these graphs like this? No, they're not. But what they do expect you to do is understand all of this. So all of this information here, they're expecting you to be able to understand those rules. And I know it sounds terrible, and it's because I'm so much older than all of you, but I am rule-based, because if I know the rules, I can deal with it. And that's why I focus on the rules, because so many of the questions are often just asking for application of those rules. All right. Okay, so sorry, Renska, is that why you got your 0.8? You used your point method in your calculation for 5.1. You would have lost marks. In fact, you might have ended up getting naught. All right. So please be really, really careful. Check those instructions so that you actually follow whatever they've asked you to do. If in doubt, do both. But some of your lecturers are quite stroppy. They'll just mark 1. So rather go with what your lecturers say, but just read the instructions really well. All right, now we're going to have a look at the different types so that you can just pay attention to define or describe, formula, what it looks like, and then what are the rules. All right, so let's have a look. Know the rules. Learn them. Folks, learn them. Because that's what they might ask you. They might just ask you, they won't say necessarily the rules, but they'll say, describe the use of income elasticity of demand, or what is the relevance of income elasticity of demand. If they're kind, they'll say to you, what are the rules relating to income elasticity of demand? But they may not, because they may not be thinking like that. They just want to see, do these students understand income elasticity of demand? So just make sure that you've learned what it looks like, how to describe it, and what are the rules. Keep it simple. And then same for cross elasticity. Cross elasticity, describe it. What does the formula look like? And then what are the rules as well? And once you've got that, I reckon you'll be able to answer most of the questions they ask. We just don't know which calculation they're going to ask. Are they going to ask price elasticity of demand, income elasticity of demand, cross elasticity of demand, or price elasticity of supply? We don't know that, but they're going to ask one of them based on the mark allocation. Another big question they can ask is your determinants, but we'll get to that in a moment. All right, your price elasticity of supply. Can you describe it? Do you know what it looks like? And then can you, in this case, also name and illustrate the different categories? All right. Remember, the categories are exactly the same, but you're going to say ES instead of EP. So when you're talking price elasticity of supply, remember to use ES, and then it will be perfectly elastic, perfectly inelastic, elastic, inelastic, and unitary elasticity. All right, so your categories are named the same, and also they greater than naught, equal to infinity, less than naught. Those are also the same. The big differences are your ES, you must use to represent it, and then what does your graph look like? Because obviously your supply is different to your demand, all right? And then we go on to your determinants. Please, this is a straightforward theory question they love to ask. Determinants of price elasticity of demand and supply. And I've put them separately here for you, but there's a lot for elasticity of demand. So I've only given you a few. There's a lot more you will have seen in your textbook or in your notes or in any of the other resources that you're looking at. There's very few for determinants of price elasticity of supply. I think there's one missing from that list. I think that's time period under consideration, but notice the difference. All right, they are not the same. Completely different. Those determinants, those factors that will influence price elasticity of demand, very different to those that will influence price elasticity of supply. All right, so a big warning there, because this is a nice, easy theoretical question they can ask you, and you don't want to get it wrong. You want to be sure that you are able to answer it. And then also watch out, have they given you a specific situation? What I mean by that, for example, if we're looking at price elasticity of demand, have they said to you the product is elastic or the product is inelastic? Because if they have, then you must adapt your determinants to the question. So, for example, we see here substituting possibilities, more substitutes, more elastic. So let's assume that they've told you that the product is inelastic. So you can't then say that there's more substitutes. What you've got to do is tell us that there are few substitutes, because that would make it less elastic. All right, so hopefully you get what I'm saying there. Just be careful. How is the question asked as to how you use this information to answer it, right? Time out. Well, we've had some time out, so I think you're all good to go still. And now we're probably going to move on to, I can't remember what happens next, so let's go and see if I've got anything more on elasticities or whether we're going into Learning Unit 6. Let's have a look. There we go. So before we go on to Consumer Theory and Utility, Learning Unit 6, anybody got anything they want to ask on elasticities that perhaps we haven't covered? Give you a moment or two. Very good question. Really good point. Okay, be careful because that's exactly the problem. So notice the differences with the determinants for Learning Unit 3 and 4 and those for Learning Unit 5. So for example, when I often ask this in class, the first thing that students will say is they'll either just say to me substitutes or they'll say price of substitutes. Now, if you say price of substitutes, you're going to get it wrong because price of substitutes is a determinant for demand, but it is not a determinant for price elasticity of demand. What is the determinant for price elasticity? It is the number of substitutes. Is that clear enough for you? Because you've just highlighted what is a very common mistake that students make. So just a little bit of feedback there for students, just to understand that difference. It's a very subtle difference. No graphs required here, calculations. We don't have to worry about the graphs. The graphs are only for price elasticity of demand and for price elasticity of supply. Good questions. All right, moving on. Here we go. Consumer theory and utility. We don't know what they're going to test you on here, but we know that there were quite a few marks allocated to this learning unit. So there's two possible ways they're going to approach this. And some of you who wrote test 1, you'll remember that they asked you about consumer, test 2 rather, first sitting. You noticed that they asked you about consumer equilibrium, and then I think there was a change in income. For the second sitting of the test, they did not ask about indifference curve analysis. They asked about marginal utility and total utility. All right. So there's two different approaches they could use. You need to be prepared for either, because as we can see, that section's got quite a lot of marks, and we want to make sure you can answer either one, whether it's from chapter 7 or chapter 8. Let's go take a look. First introduction, learning unit 6, chapter 7 mainly. You get introduced to utility. You must be able to tell us what is utility, and then you must be able to distinguish between what they call two notions. I just call them two ways of measuring or two types. All right, so it's two ways of measuring utility, or it's two types of utility. Cardinal utility, which is the idea that it can be measured. So if I eat a packet of chips, I'm saying it gives me 20 utils. Complete nonsense, actually, but we can allocate numbers to that. All right, so you may say it only gives you 10. Somebody else may say, because they're feeling really hungry, it gives them 50 utils. All right, so these are made up numbers, but they're very useful because they allow us to do calculations that are pretty accurate and representative of consumer behavior. The ordinal utility, remember ranking. So those are your two keys. Cardinal, remember measure. Ordinal, remember ranking. That will help you to get the difference between them and not get confused, okay? Then we go on and we're going to go cardinal is what looks mostly at measuring marginal utility and total utility. And then ordinal is what looks at indifference curves and budget lines. Yes, Jason, a formula sheet is given. It will be included in the exam and it will have all your basic formulas on it. But you have to recognize them because it doesn't give you all the information, you know, that you need to identify a formula. It just provides the actual formulas. Understanding cardinal approach, that is your measuring, that is chapter 7, and there you must know what is marginal utility. And the word that I say, students, I don't know if your lecturers have already pointed this out to you, but what I always say is that addition to total. That's what marginal is. It is addition to total. It doesn't matter which concept we're looking at. It is the addition to total. Now, often in the textbook, it is described as the change in the total utility when one more unit is consumed, which is absolutely correct. No problems with that. But students then often forget how to use it because they get confused by the word change. Whereas if you think of it as the addition to total utility, then sometimes that gives you more clarity on it. All right. There I say addition to or change in total utility. And then be able to describe, sometimes that's the easy question, distinguish between or explain the relationship between marginal utility and total utility. Straightforward, easy, theory will get you the answer, all right. And of course, then NB, your law of diminishing marginal utility, not to be confused with your law of diminishing marginal returns in Learning Unit 7. All right, so be very clear for yourself. Have you learned your law of diminishing marginal utility? What does it mean? And then do you know your law of diminishing marginal returns, and what does it mean, and where does it apply? Students often mix those two up, so be really, really careful of that. This is your marginal utility application, marginal and total utility application. You've got to be able to fill in these numbers. All right, so you've got to be able to work between your marginal utility and your total utility, backwards and forwards, and be able to fill in gaps. That comes largely through knowing the formulas, obviously, but more importantly, through knowing what you're actually doing. So I'm going to ask you quickly if you would be able to give me a couple of numbers. So let me point it out for you. Let's go first. Total utility when I drink 1 cup of coffee. What would it be? Total utility when I drink 1 cup of coffee. Absolutely. Well done, Megan. Same as marginal. So at that first, for that first unit, your marginal and your total are usually the same. All right, so let's go to the next one. Now I drink my 2nd cup. We can see there, that's all cool, it's given to us. And now I drink my 3rd cup of coffee. I can see now that my total utility is 93, but what is my marginal utility? In other words, what additional utility did I get from that 3rd cup of coffee? Megan, you spot on correct there, girl. Absolutely, it was 20. And how do we get that? We look at the difference here, the difference between 93 and 73. That gave me another 20 utils when I consumed that next cup of coffee. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Happy that you all know it. Moving on to the answers so that you can see them. I'm happy that you were all quite comfortable and able to do that. Well done. So you won't be caught. Just watch out. The big problem is this here. You've always got to check that change in quantity. Because if that change in quantity is not 1, in other words, 2 minus 1 is 1, 3 minus 2 is 1, 4 minus 3 is 1. But if it's not, if it's more, you must make sure you divide your change by whatever that difference is. All right, so please be careful. Can be a little bit more challenging in the actual exam than this one. Hopefully they'll stick with this Q, delta Q is 1. All right, so that's the end of chapter 7, pretty much what you've got to know from chapter 7. And now we go on to chapter 8. Remember, that's the second part of Learning Unit 6, and that requires us to look at indifference curve analysis based on the ordinal utility. So what I'm doing is I'm showing you here, this is the formal way of expressing this information. So that's what they may ask you in the question. Used indifference curve analysis to show consumer equilibrium. And then you must know this is indifference curves and budget lines. All right, so both of them come, although we refer to it as difference curve analysis, it automatically covers both indifference curves and budget lines. There we go. First starting point, what is the definition of an indifference curve? Can you define it? And then what we do is we say, do you know what it looks like? All right, so what an indifference curve should look like? Students, once again, axes first. Then what you do is label your axes. Don't forget, and notice, please, no P's. No P's for price here. Too often, we see a P and a Q. We don't want to see a P and a Q here. You're going to lose marks if you do that, even if you did it unintentionally or a silly mistake because you weren't concentrating. As soon as you've got indifference curves, you've got quantity and quantity. And then remember, what does it look like? That's what it looks like. Downward sloping convex curve, labeled U for utility. All right, so be careful. Simple, straightforward stuff, but students mess it up often in that final exam. So that's your indifference curve. Now, what does this actually tell us from a you and me perspective? In other words, not the definition of indifference curves as we see. What it's actually showing us is how much bread and how much meat somebody, whoever this consumer is, let's pretend it's me, what combination of bread and meat that I need to give me a certain level of satisfaction. And therefore, to change that, all my points along that curve are all going to be the same. So whether I'm up here with this much bread and only a teeny weeny bit of meat, or whether I'm down here with a very little bread and a lot of meat, I'm getting exactly the same level of satisfaction as long as I'm on that utility curve. So then how do we change that position? In other words, if I want to have more utility, what do we have to do? We have to have a higher utility curve. So that one would give me more utility. And then, of course, if we were looking for less utility, then I would have a lower level of utility. So the only way we can increase our utility is to either move that way, and to decrease our utility, we're going to move that way. So NB, anywhere on your curve, your utility is exactly the same. Also, another thing to remember is that at any point in time, you and me are faced with all of these utility curves. We have an infinite amount of utility curves for any combination of products that we care to investigate. Determine where we can be. In other words, what are the factors that will tell us we can be on U or U1 or U2? What are those determining factors? And that is the information that we use to derive the budget line, because we call that our constraints. What are our constraints to consumption? And what will limit our consumption or our level of satisfaction that we're able to obtain is two things: income and price. All right, so that's what we're going to go and have a look at. And notice, please, nowhere am I talking about demand or supply. Please, that was one of the mistakes that a lot of students made in test 2 when they were describing their consumer equilibrium. They were talking about demand and supply. Nothing to do with demand and supply. All right, that's why we talk consumption and level of satisfaction or utility. No demand, no supply. We don't want to see that, because you're going to lose marks if you start talking about that. So let's go and have a look at the next thing that you must know. Oh, this is a bit of a theory for your indifference curves. Your pure theory. Do you know your assumptions? CCN, I always say, try and remember them with CCN, CCN, completeness, consistency, non-satiation. Assumptions, do you know what the marginal rate of substitution is? Could you describe it? And that is how we sacrifice some of one product, get more of another product to keep the same level of satisfaction. All right. So here we say substitute the one product for another. This is called the marginal rate of substitution. And that is as we move down along our indifference curve. Also, MRS is the slope of the indifference curve, NB. And then for those of you who are up for it, make sure you know your equation. You're not going to have to use the equation. You're not going to have to apply it, but you might have to recognize it, all right, in terms of a multiple choice question or something like that. So that's your theory. One more little bit of theory for indifference curves. Properties. Don't confuse them with assumptions. All right, be very clear. What are your assumptions? What are your properties? Common mistake made in the final exam. Students mix those two up. All right, so we said, what are the constraints that are going to limit our consumption? Notice I don't say demand, I say consumption. What will limit our satisfaction or our utility or our consumption? Two things, which we spoke about earlier: the amount of income and the prices of different goods or services. Now, they could give you this information, and if they do, I'm going to use the example that is given in the textbook. They can give you the income of the consumer, they can tell you the prices of the two goods, and then they can ask you to derive the budget line. All right, so let's go and have a look. There's the information. Income is 96 Rand, the price of bread is 16 Rand, the price of meat is 24 Rand, and now we must find the intercepts for the budget line. In other words, I must derive my budget line. Let's go and have a look at what we're going to do. Simple, simple calculation. There's what we're going to do. We're going to take our income and we're going to divide whatever our income is by the price of bread. That will give us how many units we can consume. And we're going to do the same for meat. We're going to take our total income. We're going to divide it by the price of meat. And that will give us however many units we can consume. Once we know that information, we can then put in the numbers and we can then have our budget line. All right, that is if they give you the numbers. If they don't, then you just draw a straight line. That's your budget line. All right, doesn't matter. Just put it in the middle there, sort of, and that's your budget line. So if you got no numbers, don't worry about them. Don't try and make up numbers and get yourself into trouble. If you still want to use 6 and 4, that's also fine, because that might be what's in your mind. But you don't need the numbers unless they give them to you. All right. So that's your budget line that is derived from income and the price of goods. What's important, though, back to that question on theory and application, is because they then expect you to understand this. So they may not ask you to do it, but they expect you to understand it. So therefore, they expect you to know in a multiple choice question or in a true false question, what will happen to this budget line if income changes? Well, we know if income increases, this budget line is going to shift to the right. If income decreases, this budget line is going to shift to the left. But what happens if the price of the product changes while income stays the same? Well, we should know from this information that we've got here, we should be able to work that out. My income stays the same, but my price changes, then there's only going to be a change along this axis. If it is the price of bread that's changed, it'll swivel inward if the price increases, it'll swivel outward if the price decreases. And then the same for meat. Income stays the same, but what happens is this little number at the bottom changes, and that's going to change this number. So if the price decreases, I can consume or purchase, let's not consume here, let's purchase a greater quantity of meat. If the price increases, I'm going to purchase or consume less meat. All right, so understanding this is what's important. Are they going to ask you to draw it? Well, we don't know. But if they ask you consumer equilibrium, you're going to have to draw both. All right. But your understanding is what is going to help you to answer most of the questions on that. So there comes indifference curve and budget line together. And that was the graph that they wanted you to draw in test 2 in the first sitting. Those of you who went into the first sitting, this is what they wanted you to be able to draw and show all of this information in there. All right. So you can pay attention to this, make sure, and that's why when I started and I said to you market equilibrium and then consumer equilibrium, you can see how much knowledge goes into knowing this and being able to draw your equilibrium position. And then, of course, they can do the what if. What if something changes? So let's go and have a look. What if? What if consumer income increases? What will it look like? Well, there we see. What has happened? My budget line has shifted to the right. My equilibrium position has changed. But how does my equilibrium position change? My utility curve does not shift. My utility curve was already there. What is shifted is my budget line, and therefore I am able to achieve a higher level of utility or a higher level of satisfaction. All right, so be careful how you explain it, because that can cost you in terms of your explanation. And then, of course, what if they asked you to do the income consumption curve? Then you just go in and put in a line that joins your two equilibriums, and there's your income consumption curve. All right. So if you notice this, let's go all the way back here. I just want to go back to equilibrium. Simple, straight starting point. Then what if? All right. So what has happened? If we go into income increasing, shifting of your budget line, new tangent or touching on a new indifference curve, and then if we need our income consumption, we just add it. And there we are. All right. Remember the name, income consumption curve. I know a lot of students struggle to remember that name. You can think ICC, and that might help you to remember it. But what if the price changes? Let's go have a look. Price changes, price of meat increases, ceteris paribus. What's going to happen? Here I've got my numbers. I didn't have to have numbers, but I've got numbers in there. Sometimes you want to because it makes it easier for you. There we have our situation, and now we have our price consumption. All right. So ladies and gents, I'm hoping that's given you a little bit of insight into how simple this actually is, as long as you keep it simple. Focus on the most important concepts in each case and make sure you got those, and then you should be good. Do we need to label the last two curves? Which ones are you thinking? Price consumption and income consumption, Megan? Is that what you're referring to? Just let me know. Yeah, you should always label them. Yeah, otherwise you might lose your marks. because you've got no way of describing them, all right? So you need to actually, you could say the line that goes through B and A is the price consumption curve. That would save you in your explanation, but I would just label them just to be safe, all right? And ladies and gents, that takes us to the end of Learning Unit 6. And now, of course, we get into Learning Unit 7 through to 10. So I hope you're still feeling strong. It looks like we're making pretty good time, all in all. So I'm fairly confident we're going to get through all of this. And now what we'll do is go and try and make this straightforward and simple for you as well. And the things you've got to focus on, bearing in mind, of course, that you haven't been tested on these. So you don't yet know what sort of mistakes you might be likely to make. You want to test yourself on that and see where am I going wrong in this. All right. All right, big deep breath and on we move. Chapter 9, Learning Unit 7. Notice these three concepts: revenue, production, costs. As you're sitting where you are now, I want you just to take a minute. I'm going to give you a minute. And I want you to go and write down whatever you can remember about revenue, whatever you can remember about production, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Just see if you've got at least 2 or 3 things you can remember, and then whatever you can remember about costs, without looking at anything. All right, so quickly just write down a few things, and then you can see as we move through the slides, yeah, what did I get and what didn't I get? All right, so giving you a minute. All righty. So now what is important is for you to look at your list. First of all, you're going to make sure that you were correct. In other words, were those things that you've written down related to that topic, or were you way off the mark? All right. So that's the first thing. Then the second thing is that if you've written them down accurately and you did know what was related to revenue, what was related to production, and what was related to costs, you already know some of the stuff. So what you want to do is not spend more time learning what you know. You want to focus on what it is you don't know. So that's what you can pick up now as we work through what it is that you didn't write down or you had not remembered about that. All right. So why do we need these 3 concepts? Because revenue is what you're going to receive in your firm. So when you sell your goods, what you would call income, we call revenue, because we've got to distinguish between income that you learned in Learning Unit 2 for Chapter 3 and revenue, which is the return on sales that is earned by firms. All right. Production is what it says. It is production. Remember, it is simply the transforming of inputs into outputs. What we're interested in is not the production you learn in business management or business studies from school or business management from varsity. We're interested simply in the transformation. We take inputs, we transform them, we turn them into outputs or quantity or total product, all right? And then your costs are the more complex ones. There's a lot of concepts under costs. Let's go and have a look. There you go. First possible question. Distinguish between total, average, and marginal revenue. Now, all it says is distinguish. It doesn't say explain the relationship. It just says you must distinguish between them, which means that what we need is a description of each of them. And so the following would serve as an answer. It doesn't have to be exactly like what I'm going to show you, but this is pretty much what we would expect. All right, so that's what we would expect. What is total revenue? What is average revenue? What is marginal revenue? And then you can throw in the equation, the formula as well, because that just shows that you know how to calculate it if necessary. All right. So that would be potentially 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, probably a 6-mark question. there'd be 2 marks for each of those points. Right, so possible, easy, straightforward question that they could ask you on revenue. Production, what must you know? A lot more on production, so there's quite a bit of theory that you need to learn. Can you describe the short-run production function? Do you know your assumptions? Your assumptions are very clearly listed. You need to be able to give those because that would be something you won't know if you haven't studied. All right, there's very little understanding there. It's just learning. So make sure you know your assumptions for the short-run production function. Can you state your law of diminishing marginal returns? Don't confuse it with the previous one that we looked at. And then can you describe the relationship between total product, average product, and marginal product? All right. Now notice here that doesn't say distinguish between. It says describe the relationship between. Now you need to take a slightly different approach. You can still give me the descriptions of each, but you've now got to show some sort of relationship. So what I'm going to use is I'm going to use the graph from your textbook to show how to answer that question. You wouldn't draw the graph, but you might use the graph to help you answer the question. All right, so let's go and show you. Here we go. So now what we want to do is we want to describe this relationship between total product, average product, and marginal product. More specifically, between total product and marginal product. So let's have a quick look. There we see our TP, and we can see that it is the S-shaped production function. Total product is my total output. What am I doing? I'm in the short run. What do we know about the short run? We have at least one input that is fixed. That fixed input, we're going to assume for this picture that we have here, is either land or factory size. You can use whichever one you feel more comfortable with. If you want to be a farmer on the land, then your land is fixed. If you want to be a producer in a factory, then your factory size is fixed. All right. So what can vary in the short run is our units of labor. We can hire more and more labor to work in our factory or to work on our farm. And as we hire more labor, so our output, our total product, will increase. And we notice that it increases, it reaches a maximum, and then it starts to decrease. Now, we want to know why. Why is this the case? And this is because of the law of diminishing marginal returns. All right, so that's your first answer. The law of diminishing marginal returns in the short run will result in this S-shaped production function. The next thing you need to be able to tell me or relate in your explanation is the relationship between marginal product, there's your marginal product curve, and your total product. So one of the first things to notice is when is total product at a maximum? Total product is at a maximum when marginal product is equal to 0. Super important rule to know. All right, so total product is at a maximum when marginal product is equal to 0. What does that mean? That means that that last worker that I hired, worker number 9 here, is contributing 0 to my total production. My total product is now at a maximum. Because what will happen if I hire worker number 10, my marginal product, the addition added to my total product by that 10th worker, is now negative. Think of it as your factory is too crowded, or your land, you've got too many machines and too many people working on your land. That's what it's telling us. And now my total product will decrease. So that's your first important rule. The second important rule is to notice the following. As long as marginal product is positive, that is both the increase in marginal product and the decrease in marginal product. As long as it is positive, in other words, it hasn't gone negative yet, my total product will increase, because that's the kind of thing they expect you to tell us. So as long as marginal product is positive, total product will increase. Rule number 2. Rule number 3. When do diminishing returns set in? Diminishing returns set in from the moment that marginal product starts to decrease. Not when it goes negative, all right? So don't tell us when it goes negative. Diminishing returns set in as soon as marginal product decreases. So, complication. You're telling me that diminishing returns sets in, but TP is still going up. Also, because it's still positive. All right, it is still positive. So each additional worker that I am hiring is still contributing to my output. They're still helping me to produce more, but they're producing less than the worker before them. So they're not quite as efficient as the previous worker, but it's still positive. All right, so that's the complication there and why students forget that rule. So that was rule number 3. Diminishing returns will set in once marginal product starts to decrease. Rule number 4, ladies and gents, refers to the relationship between AP and MP. As long as MP, marginal product, is greater than average product will be increasing. As soon as marginal product is less than average product will decrease. So therefore, marginal product and average product will be equal when they intersect each other. And that will be at the maximum of average product. Now that one's quite a difficult one. All right, so if you can get the other 3 and you're good, you're at least halfway, well, you're more than halfway there. But if you can get that 4th one, then you're heading for distinctions. All right, because now you truly have understood this. All right, so the 4th one, Megan, absolutely, because that's the tricky one. The 4th one tells us as long as marginal product is greater than average product is increasing. As soon as marginal product becomes less than average product is decreasing. And so where will these two be equal? When average product is at its maximum. In other words, where marginal product intersects that average product curve, AP, average product, is at its maximum. So that is your 4th rule. You can see it's a much longer one. Absolutely, let's put it in there. So give me a few moments because it's going to take a little bit of time to type it in, but I'll type it in for you. All right. I think this does it, ladies and gents, for you. There we go. That should help you. I've tried to keep it simple. I've used MP instead of typing out, obviously, marginal product and average product, but that should help you to remember it. Okay, so let's go through. Let's put them in. So rule number 1. That was zero. There was rule number 1. Nathan, yeah, we'll go on break shortly. Just give me a minute or so. I'll just finish this and then we can go on break. All right, rule number 3 was, let me just think, rule number 1, maximum, as long as Um, diminishing returns. When rule number 3. All right, let's have a look. Law of diminishing returns is if one person with a shovel can't cultivate 20 units of land well, in other words, if one labor is combined with land, land will not be utilized properly. As the quantity of labor increases, yes, correct. Your starting point, Jason, a little bit off key, so just check on that one. But then your last part is correct. So as the quantity of labor increases, given a fixed amount of land, more units of labor are added, the workers get into each other's way. Absolutely. So as we initially, one worker is going to struggle to be super productive. But 2, 3, 4 workers, absolutely, we've got more and more output. We then hire 5, 6, 7, 8 workers. They are still positively contributing, but less than the worker before until we get to the maximum. And then if we hire any more workers, they get in each other's way. 100%. All right, let's go on break, ladies and gents. So on break, we'll be on till the hour. So on break, once again, I'm happy to take questions till 1100. first, Nathan. Yeah, absolutely. Come back whenever you like. And then you can always watch the recording or at least go through the slides anyway. It looks like it's recording fine, so it should be all okay. And then Siasanda, in the specific chapter, do we always have to cover the long run? No, only the short run production function. All right, the long run production function in this chapter is not prescribed. So yeah, good question, but just focus on the short run. Yeah, there's quite a lot of extra stuff in the textbook, which you don't have to study. Hopefully, Siasanda, you heard my answer, that you are here. Just give me a confirmation, otherwise I'll repeat it later. Yeah, okay, good. And then Renska, ma'am, do you think we will finish before 12? What's the time now? Look, we're making pretty good progress. So I'm kind of confident that I don't think we'll finish before 12, but I think we might finish somewhere around 12-ish, which will be fantastic because then we're done for the day and I can start getting the recordings uploaded. Yeah. And listen, I don't upload them. I forward them to the people who do upload them, and then they have to do it. So let's hope they're working on Friday afternoon. But that's why I'm saying as a backup, I can't distribute the recordings because there seems to be so many complications. But I'll send the links to your lecturers, and then your lecturers can upload from their side. But it may not be the recordings, it may just be the slides. But at least that will be a bit of a reminder for you of what we've covered. So hopefully you've got a few notes any which way. And then once you've got the slides, that will help you to remember. Fingers crossed that we do get the full-on recording and that you can just listen to it as required. All right, folks, we are back. Let's go. So there's one of your important things to know. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, let's first check. Can you answer this? According to the law of diminishing returns, total product reaches a maximum when? You should all know this now. TP reaches a maximum when MP is, and you can put the answer in the chat. Let's just check. We're all busy now. There we go. Absolutely D. All right, when will the recording be uploaded? We've answered that question, D. 0, MP0, absolutely, which is answer D. Absolutely. Well done. So that is one of the easy questions you could get now, and if you know those rules, you'll be able to answer it. Look, very unlikely that you're going to get the calculations, but worth just practicing, making sure, can you apply your formulas? Do you know how to go in? So I'm going to ask you quickly just to do one or two for us. So let's go in and see what would we put in. Let's put in the average product for 1 unit. You could put it in your chat line quickly for me. Yep, that's right. It's going to be 16. And then your marginal product for 1 unit as well. Sorry, my system has just frozen. All right, also 16. So both average product and marginal product for your first unit are all going to be 16. All right, let's see quickly if you can do, what would A be? What is your total product when we produce or we hire 2 workers? So total product when we hire 2 workers. Yeah, there we go. So just checking that quickly. Has to be, that's right, Kiara, that's it, absolutely, 36. So it's going to be 18 times 2. We know that each worker on average produces 18 units, so therefore 2 workers together are going to produce 2 times 18. But now let's go and quickly see what will the marginal product. So let's put in here the number quickly. So we said that this is 36, which is 2 times 18. So that's 36. So let's go and quickly see, can we work out what is going to be my marginal product of my second worker? In other words, addition to total. How much did my second worker add to my total? So my marginal product of my second worker. There we go. That's what it is. So you'll notice that if you talk yourself through these things, they'll become a lot easier. So don't just try to blindly apply the formulas, rather talk yourself through it. So my second worker added 20. Because remember what your definition is for marginal product. So this is where your theory helps you. Marginal product is the addition to total product when I hire 1 more worker. So now I had worker number 1, and worker number 1 was able to produce 16 units. I then hire worker number 2, and both my workers together were able to produce 36 units. But what I want to know is, how much did worker number 2 add to my total output? So what we do is we take the difference between the two. 36 minus 16 means that worker number 2 added 20 units to my output. That's my marginal product. All right. So hopefully if you think yourself through it like that, suddenly it'll become super clear to you, and then you won't struggle anymore with these calculations. But you've got to do that process. Otherwise, forever, this is a bit of a mystery to everyone. All right. So let's just get rid of this, and then we can go on to the answers quickly. Move on to the next. Oh, there we go. Sorry, let's go back. There you go. So there you've got all your answers in. Simple, easy little table. As I say, not really necessarily likely that you'll get this table. Mostly they do give tables. It's usually the cost tables. But this practice helps you to understand the relationship. The same as the graph helps you to understand the relationship. This also helps you to understand the relationship. And then you're in a stronger position when they ask questions about all of these different concepts. So that's your TP, AP, MP. Next one, or last one, costs. Now you can see there's a lot of stuff you've got to know on costs. All right. A lot of theory, which is great for many of you, because often your theory is what gets you through. Maybe your application is a little bit dicey, but you got your theory. Make sure you can answer all these kind of questions. And then notice too, and remember, these two together give us what we call economic costs. Or remember. All right, so Talon, we're going to go back one. Let's quickly go back and look at the table again. So you're talking about this 20 here. How did we get that? Well, we apply the formula. Marginal product, MP, is equal to the change in total product divided by the change in N. All right, so that's what we were doing. I just was doing it in words rather than in the mathematical formula. So let's have a look first at the formula, and then let's go back to what I explained. So change in total product, that was my change in total product. That's the difference between 36 and 16. So delta TP, I've got to just go a bit slow here. So for those of you who can see it, what I can't see it, I'm writing delta TP, change in TP is equal to 20. But we've got to go and check now because we've got to apply that formula. And that has to be divided by delta N. So this is N, your units of labor. So now we go and we say, what is delta N? Delta N is 2 minus 1. So delta N is equal to 1. So we say 20 divided by 1 is going to give us 20. All right, so there's where you've got to be able to do that. All right, so now the next step is we go to the next question. Oh, let me go back to what I explained. An easier way to sometimes do it is to say, what is marginal product? It is the addition to total product when I hire one more worker. So when I had one worker, total product was 16. When I had two workers, my total product was 36. So what was the addition to 16 to get me to 36? And then you can work out 36 minus 16 is 20. So you've got two ways to approach it. The safer method, though, is to use that formula, because if you're using your formula, then you're mathematically going to get it correct. But then you've also got to understand what you're doing. Otherwise, this becomes mysterious to you. All right, so question on 66. How did we get 66? So how did we know this one here? Because we didn't have B, so we couldn't just multiply it by 3, which is what obviously we could do if they gave us 22, but they didn't. What did they give us? They gave us 30. Marginal product. So now I go back to that same analysis that we used earlier. When I had two workers, my total was 36. Then I hire worker number 3. What does worker number 3 add to my total? 30. So when I get worker number 3, he or she contributes 30 units. So now what is my total? 36 from 2 workers plus 30 for 3 workers. That will give me 66. All right, so once again, what were we doing? We were finding out the addition to total when I hire one more worker. And then we get our total. All right, so you can work it backwards and forwards, and that's where the theory can help you. So keep telling yourself that marginal product is my addition to total when I hire one more worker. And that should eventually, then you'll get that aha moment, and then you'll have it. I'm hoping that that's given you a little bit of assistance there, folks, and that you would be able to work with it. Many of you who have already grasped it, you are just applying your formula, which is absolutely fine. But then just also be sure that you do know your theory too, so that you can answer those theoretical questions. All right, back to your costs. What do we know about explicit and implicit costs? So if we go in here and we say plus here, so if I plus these two, what do these give us? All right, change in TP Taylor is simply, all right, so let me give you, let's go in and say that. Change in TP is a difference, which is a subtraction between two levels of TP. All right, so that's what you're doing. So change in TP is the difference between two levels of total product. So if I tell you total product, so I could give you something like this. I could say TP, and let's show you quickly here, not even in the table, because sometimes the table is what confuses people. If I said to you, total product is equal to 16, TP1 is equal to 16, TP2 is equal to 36. And then now I'm asking Taylor, all right, Taylor, can you please tell me what is the change in TP for these two? What is the change in TP? Is equal to question mark. There you go. And what did you do there? You just took the difference between those two numbers. That's pretty much what you're doing. When you are doing a change, you've got to have two numbers. So you've got to be able to work out what is the difference between those two numbers. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of clarity on that. A quick yes or no. And then you divide by 1. Yeah, absolutely. So there you go. So your change is always just the difference between. And that's another way to also remind yourself, if you can think of it in terms of theory. But you can see as soon as it wasn't in the table context, and I gave you information like that, you were able to do it. So don't let the table go and mess with your numerical abilities, because you do understand it. Practice obviously helps a lot. So practicing with stuff that you've got the answers for can help you a lot to get comfortable with these calculations. All right, so back to my question. What do we call explicit costs plus implicit costs together? Can anybody tell me? Not profit yet. Not profit yet. Profit economic costs. That's right. We can't talk profit yet. We don't know our profit. We only know our profit when we take revenue minus costs. All right. So we don't yet have any profit, but what we do use is economic costs to calculate economic profit. So that's where you are going. Be careful. Make sure that you don't get ahead of where you got to be for the answer. All right. So explicit plus implicit costs are economic costs. And what they do allow us to do is differentiate between accounting costs and economic costs. All right. Because accounting costs only looks at explicit, whereas economic costs look at both of those. All right. So NB, make sure you know and get that, because these are easy theory questions that they're going to ask you. And then, of course, be able to deal with all of your different costs, your total costs and your unit costs. As I say, you will have the formula sheets, but you've got to be able to recognize what are they referring to, and they're going to use abbreviations. All right. So they're not going to tell you total fixed cost in words. They're going to tell you TFC. And you must know that TFC is total fixed cost. All right. So you've got to be able to know enough to be able to recognize them. And then, of course, these are your unit costs. So all of these are what we call unit costs. So that's super important for students to be able to differentiate between what is total and what is unit. Now, what is the difference? So I always like to use my a pizza place as an example here. If you are running, say you've opened your own little pizza store and you are producing pizzas and selling them like crazy. You want to know two bits of information. You want to know your total cost, total revenue and total cost, total production. How many pizzas can I produce? How much money am I getting in from producing those pizzas, and what are my total costs? But you also want to know the cost of each pizza, how much it is costing you, and that's your unit cost, all right? That helps you to be more efficient. Good question, Jason. Very good question. Focus on what I've put in my slides. Focus on what I've put in my slides, because that's what you need to know. So just focus on knowing, and there's only 4 learning unit 7. I think there's about 4 or 5 slides. It's just focus on knowing that recognition and terminology. So make sure that you recognize the information and you know your terminology. And the reason that you have to is because even though it counts for very few marks in the actual overall exam, what you have is we use this information in Learning Unit 8, in Learning Unit 9, and in Learning Unit 10. So what you're learning here carries you forward for all of them. I would say formulas important, but Anna-Marie, I would also say focus on the concepts. In other words, can you describe all the concepts? Do you know all of these things that are on my slides? Can you describe them? If you can, chances are you've got enough to answer any question that they ask you. All right. And then you'll also have enough information to use it in Learning Unit 8 and 9 and 10. Okay. But a very good question, because it's quite difficult to know how much time and effort to put in when something doesn't count that much in the exam. All right, this is one of the things that they could give you. They could give you a very small table to complete. This is from a previous exam paper. And this caused a lot of consternation because students really struggled with it. Now, it's the one I did in my class yesterday, and it's the one I show you today because it is what can cause a headache for students. I'm not going to do the whole thing with you, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But what I want to ask you is, can anybody tell me what would be the starting position in a table for costs is your total fixed cost. Now, whether they give you a column or they don't give you a column, it is the thing that you're going to need to identify. All right, I've put a column in this case, it was there. So can anybody please tell me from the information that is in front of you now, what is the total fixed cost? Have a careful look and see, can you tell me what is the total fixed cost? I'm going to wait for a few, and I can see the confusion coming through. Now, let me warn you what has happened. 25 is not correct. And the reason 25 is not correct is because there's not a zero. If there was a zero, you would have been correct, but there isn't a zero, which means that once we get to producing 1 unit, we can no longer take whatever that cost is in that first line. We've got to look for additional information. So where do we go? We go to average fixed cost. That's going to be our first stop. We're going to have a look at average fixed cost. And we see, do they give us any information there? Yes. What do we see? We've got a 15. When I produce 4 units, my average fixed cost is 15. Therefore, I can calculate. There we go. Do you see how easy you were able to fix yourself? Once you knew that little bit of information, be careful. Check. Is it 0? In other words, when we go and look at those units, is it 0, the first one, or is it 1? Be careful. Mostly they start with 0, which means you'll be safe, and then they'll probably go put TC is equal to 60, and then you'll know your fixed cost, total fixed cost is 60. But if they don't, be careful. So yes, absolutely, some of you realized your error, and then you were able to go and fix it. Let's go and see. So there we have it. So 15 times 4 is going to give me 60, and then I can fill in 60 all the way through. So now at least I have all of my fixed costs sorted, and then that makes it much easier for me to then get started on finding all of the additional information. In order to find A, I've got to first fill in my total cost for Learning Unit 1. So I've got to fill that in. Now, how do I know that? That's simply application of my formula. Because what do I know? I know that TC is equal to total variable cost plus total fixed cost. So that's an easy one to be able to put in. What is a little bit more challenging is A. So I'm going to ask you quickly, do you know what the value, can anybody tell me what is the value of A? Jason, you would be correct. Problem is we don't have our total variable cost for 2 units. So we've got our total fixed cost, but we don't have our total variable cost. So what is our backup? Absolutely, whoever's put that answer, Rook, you correct. 105. Can anybody else tell me, how do you think he got that? How did he get his 105? 85 plus 20. Well done, Josh. Absolutely. So what did he do? He used his marginal. Total plus marginal. Absolutely, that's what he did. He said, total cost when I produce 1 pizza was 85 Rand. Then I produced 2 pizzas. What was the addition to total cost when I produced that second pizza? It was 20. So 85 plus 20 is going to give me 105. All right, so I'm not going to spend any more time on that. Let's go on to what the answers would be. There you go. Make sure you can do a little table like that. All right, so once again, I'll go back. You can take a picture. Let's clear this quickly. And then you can take a picture of this one before the answers were there. Let's go. Get a picture of that, and then get a picture of the answer one. So then you could go and test yourself on it and just see, am I able to do that? All right. And then, okay, so sorry, it's a bit tedious. Back. There's your answer one. And then you can go and practice with it and just see, okay, and I promise you, you do this 2 or 3 times, you're going to be sorted. You'll be able to answer any questions that they ask you. And you'll be able to do a table as well if necessary. All right, that's the end. Oh, learning unit 7, almost at the end. Important, being able to draw a graph that shows all your unit costs. Now, the reason this is so important is because of what we teach you in learning unit 8 and learning unit 9. Because when we talk about the MC curve and the AC or ATC curve, and we talk about the A, this is where it comes from. All right, so that is why this graph is so important. Often they ask it in the final exam anyway, and it's super easy marks if you've learned it. But more important is, can you use it in learning unit 8 and learning unit 9? All right. And that, I think, is the end of learning unit 7. You'll notice I've put 8 and 9 together because they really are one section. They really cover market structures, and you must see it as one big chapter, all right, because we've got to learn everything, particularly learning unit 8, because that's quite heavily weighted in the exam, and then learning unit 9 is the fill in the gaps kind of thing. Let's go back one for you quickly. There we go. All right, we're good. There we go. All right, now let's show. I've made this short and sweet. I'm giving you the absolute critical bits of information that you have to have in order to be able to answer most of the questions that will come out of this. I say most because there's quite a few pure theory questions that they can ask you, and there you've got to have just learned the theory, all right? But I'm focusing on those questions that are going to deal with, have you understood the material correctly? And are you able to apply it? All right, so let's go and have a look and see what I'm talking about. First thing, do you know what we're talking about when we talk market power? Remember, market power is the ability to influence the price. Perfect competition has no market power. That's why we say no market power. No individual can influence the price. And of course, that is critical to understanding perfect competition. So in B, they may not question you on market power, but they're going to question you on perfect competition. And you need to understand that they have no market power. They cannot influence the price. What about imperfect competition? Monopolistic competition, oligopoly, pure monopoly. They can all influence the price to varying degrees. Not totally, in other words, they can't necessarily charge whatever price they like because they are constrained by the demand curve, but they have a high level of influence over the price of their product. All right, so they have market power. And of course, how do you distinguish between all of these different market structures? Most important is you learn that table. That table is essential. All right, folks, you got to learn it and you got to know it. And they're going to ask you questions that is going to help you to answer. And that could be in the MCQs, it could be in the true falses, it could be in the 4-mark or 2-mark questions. It could even be in the longer questions, all right? But that is what's going to help you to be able to distinguish between your different market structures. So that's NB to start with. Second thing is these 2 rules. These 2 rules are going to be not tested directly. They're not going to ask you what are the rules that apply to all market structures necessarily. They could, but they don't very often. But what they're going to do is expect you to understand them in the context of a question. So, for example, your profit maximizing rule, that's known as your output rule. How does a firm decide how much it should produce? More specifically, how does a profit maximizing firm decide how much it should produce? And then your actual profit rules. Your profit rules are how much profit are we making? All right, so you've got to be able to do that. Your output rules are your shutdown rule and your profit maximizing rule. Profit maximizing, also known as equilibrium. Make sure you link those. Learn this, know this. All right, be able to apply it if necessary. And then your profit rules are AR and AC. So look at the difference between these two. You can see in the one, we're looking at TVC. So go back to shutdown rule. Let's start shutdown rule. What do we look at? We look at total revenue and we look at total variable cost or average revenue and average variable cost. What does this mean? Be able to explain that. When we go to profit maximizing rule, also known as equilibrium, we're just looking at MR is equal to MC. Make sure you can tell us why. Why is MR equal to MC? Why is that the best possible position to produce? You'll notice equilibrium again, all right? Then we go to how much profit is the firm making. And here you've got AR and AC. Learn it. It's easy stuff if you've learned it. Once again, as I say, I always like the rules, and these are rules. And honestly, they helped me when I was a first-year student in economics. I pretty much got by on rules. That's what I learned. I knew exactly what those rules were. I could explain them and I could apply them. And that's pretty much what got me by. All right. So that's why I still, even today, like those rules. And then you've got the pure learning. So now we go into our market structures. Now you've got to just learn. So let's have a look. Requirements, conditions, features, characteristics. And that is that table 10 will help you with that. All right, that table in chapter 10, learning unit 8, it will help you with it. Can you describe perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic competition, oligopoly? My advice is to take one piece of paper, divide it into 4 columns, and put your characteristics for each of them on that one piece of paper. See how many you can put on there and how many you remember, and that will help you not to confuse them. And that's why that table is so useful, because it's putting all that information into one table, and you can see what's the same and what's different. And that should help you to memorize it. Can you tell us what is meant by price takers? And can you tell us what is meant by price makers? These are important things. They're going to question you on it or expect you to be able to explain in your answers what is a price taker, what is a price maker, all right? And then for each of your market structures, are you able to give an example? And you'll see I've given examples for each of them. So just make sure that you learn them correctly, because we often find that we ask this simple, straightforward question and students mess it up completely because they haven't understood or they haven't learned accurately. We don't know which one it is. All right, so easy bits of stuff that you can learn for each of your market structures. And then comes the actual application. So now we're going into the application. So now we're asking you questions. Can you draw a graph and explain equilibrium position of a perfectly competitive firm in the short run or in the long run? And then what are you supposed to be able to do with that? Let's go talk about that and show you. I'm going to test you first. 4 questions. Don't put them in the chat. Just put them onto a piece of paper for yourself, and in a moment or two, I'll go through them with you. So first of all, which market structure is represented by this graph? Can you write that down? What is the firm's profit maximizing daily output? Can you identify the quantity that this firm will produce? What is the total daily revenue of the profit maximizing firm? And then what is the marginal revenue of the firm if it decides to produce only 55 units? All right. So let's go in and see. Taylor, we haven't yet asked for what kind of profit we're making. All right. We're asking what the actual profit is. So in this case, we are actually asking you to calculate. We're not asking you to give us a theory. You are correct. It is economic profit, but we've got to make sure that we give the number as well. All right. So let's go through it quickly. Market structure. Now you can give me an answer. Market structure is absolutely perfect competition. Perfect competition. There we go. Perfect competition. All right. Super. What is the firm's profit maximizing daily output? Now you give me the answer. Absolutely, Donovan. And why is that? Can you tell me why? What rule did you apply there? If anybody else can tell me, what rule did Donovan apply? Oh, sorry, I'm not seeing my messages. Sorry, there we go. MR equals MC or MC equals MR. Spot on. And what I would have done here straight away, if I was in this exam, I would have gone in here and I would have said MR equal to AR at my demand curve. So straight away I would have put that in, because then that would help me to immediately identify where is MR equal to MC. There MR is equal to MC at 100 units. So there I can correctly identify how many units this firm is going to produce. And then we go in, what is the total daily revenue of the profit maximizing firm? Tell me quickly, what is our daily revenue? There we go. We've got it. Thanks, Donovan. 900, absolutely. And of course, that was simply 9 times 100. So once you know that total revenue is P times Q, so price, 9 Rand, times the quantity that you sell, 100, and that's your 900, all right? And then we go into the next question. What is the marginal revenue of the firm? Now, this is a tricky one, so be careful, don't get caught by it. What is the marginal revenue of the firm if it decides to produce only 55 units? Donovan, you are absolutely correct. It is still 9. Don't get caught into the trap, because now you go to 55 and then you want to tell me, no, it's 4. No, your marginal revenue is still the price. So unless that price changes, the marginal revenue will not change. All right, a firm wouldn't want to produce at 55, but let's say they were on their way to getting to 100, but they haven't got there yet. They're still at 55. The marginal revenue is still 9. All right, be careful. That's a little bit of a trick question. And then we go back to Talon. Talon, if I had to ask what kind of profit are they making, you're absolutely correct. You would tell me that it is economic profit. And how can we see that? We apply the AR and the AC rule, and we can see that average revenue is above. There's my average revenue, which is at my demand curve and my price line, and my average cost is below. So we can see that that is economic profit. Make sure you can distinguish in words between economic profit and normal profit. All right, an important a bit of theory that you must know. Absolutely, Jason, AR is greater than AC. All right, so we passed that test. Now let's go and see if we can pass a little bit of a more challenging test. Show, with the aid of a graph, where a perfectly competitive firm's profit is maximized. So you could have something as simple as this, and you could have to show where the profit will be maximized. And of course, you would show me that my profit is maximized at that point where MR is equal to MC. But you may have to show me additional stuff. So you've got to show me what's going to happen if I'm here where MR is greater than MC, or if I'm here where MR is less than MC. So if we were just illustrating, we would do it something like this. If marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, then I should produce more. If marginal revenue is less than marginal cost, then I will produce less. All right, so could man move back one side? I will, Alex, in a moment. Let me do that for you, and then we'll come back to this one. So just looking at this, if it was just an illustrate, because it's just said show with the aid of a diagram, it hasn't asked you to explain, it's just asked you to show. So you would need to show me what's actually happening in that graph. All right, let me go back quickly for Alex. There you go, Alex. Okay, we're good. Moving forward. All right, so now what we want to do is, just before I get started, we want to now go in. Let's assume the question says, show a perfectly competitive firm in a short-run equilibrium position making normal profit. All right, so short-run, normal profit. Unusual in short-run, but not impossible. Remember, we've got 3 different short-run equilibrium positions of the firm in a perfectly competitive market. In fact, we've got 3 equilibrium positions for all firms in whichever market structure they work in the short run. All right, so let's go and have a look if a perfectly competitive firm is making a normal profit. And I'm going to be very strict here because this is what's going to help you to get to grips with these diagrams. Use the following technique when you are drawing your graphs. Axes, label your axes. First thing you do is your demand curve. It doesn't matter which market structure you're working with, put in your demand curve. Now, in the case of perfect competition, you've got a straight line demand curve, which you were able to identify in the previous graph. If you weren't, that's a serious gap in your knowledge. All right, you need to fix that. You must understand that perfect competition has a straight line, or the firm in perfect competition has a straight line demand curve, and you must be able to tell us why. The main reason is because they are price takers. All right, so these are all price takers. They have to accept the price that is determined in the market because they have no market power. They cannot influence the price of the product. Once you've got your demand curve, the next thing you need to ask yourself is, how much will I produce? And to do that, you have to get your MC curve. There's the MC curve, and that will tell us the quantity. And there's my quantity. Notice I haven't put numbers in now because I don't need them. I'm just doing it conceptually. At this point, my firm is in equilibrium. Profit maximizing firm in equilibrium. But it doesn't tell us what sort of profit they are making. So if we want to show normal profit or zero economic profit, we've got to bring in our AC curve or our ATC curve, and we've got to put it on the line. There it is. And that is now AR is equal to AC, and that is normal profit. All right, so if you follow that step-by-step process for each of your graphs, you're going to find it super, super easy. And now we ask ourselves the question, all right, so what if the question doesn't say normal profit? What if it says economic profit? Or what if it says economic loss? What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to take out that, and I'm then going to decide, where do I put my AC curve? Everything else remains the same. Starting position, exactly the same. But now we've got to decide, where do we put that AC curve in order to be able to identify the kind of profit that we're looking at. So let's go to the next graph quickly. Here we go. Let's go. Economic profit. Look where my AC curve or my ATC curve is. The spot that you want to look at is here. All right, that's your spot. You're not worried about what's happening here, and you're not worried about what's happening here. The only place that you're interested in is on that quantity line. That quantity line is what's giving you the information that you need. And there is my average cost. So I can see that my average cost is well below my average revenue. Therefore, I'm making economic profit. If we want to show economic loss, what do? There we go. We put it above. And there's my economic loss. How do I know this is economic loss? Because if I take this line up to my average cost, what do I see? My average cost is there. And that is well above my average revenue. That tells me I am not now making a loss. That is only possible in the short run because I'm not going to keep on making losses in the long run. I'm going to shut down. Or I've got to improve my position or reduce my costs or something. But I can't keep making a loss in the long run. But in the short run, I can keep making a loss. All right. So there's important little tips for you in terms of being able to draw the graph. And you'll realize that it's actually really only one graph. It's not 3 different graphs that you're studying. It's one graph that you're then adapting to whichever the circumstances are or whatever the question tells you. Sorry, I'm just trying to erase this so that I can go get it out the way. There we go. All right, so that's your perfect competition done. Make sure you can tell me about perfect competition. Can you describe it? What does it look like? Many buyers, many sellers. Nobody can influence the price. Product is homogeneous. No barriers to entry. No government intervention. Factors of production are perfectly mobile. Perfect knowledge. All right, that's theory that you've got to learn. All right, I'm not looking at now because that is an assumption that I make that you can learn that theory. But now we move on to the next one. Monopolist. How are you going to draw the graph for the monopolist now? You've got to recognize that it looks different to perfect competition. But you start with the same technique. Axes. Label the axes. Put in your demand curve. There's your demand curve. Which one is your demand curve? This one. Your average revenue curve is your demand curve. Put in your demand curve. And notice MR is below your AR, always. Know that. If you can understand it, even better. But if you can't understand it, just learn it. Remember, your AR first, your MR below. And then your next step, MC. We've got to now put in our MC curve. That will give us our equilibrium. There comes equilibrium. That gives us now our quantity. But now be careful, because what you've got to do now is find out the price. But you've got to go to the price line, all right? So there we go. There goes our price line. There goes our price. And now notice where my AC, it came in a bit early. It shouldn't have come in yet. What I would have done first is put in my price, and then I would have brought in my AC curve, depending upon what sort of profit I want to show. All right, so let's go now. We've got profit, economic profit. There's my economic profit. So my monopolist in the short run is able to make economic profit, but remember, my monopolist in the long run can also make economic profit. Ceteris paribus. Why do I say ceteris paribus? Because everything else has to remain the same. Your demand curve and your cost must stay the same, because if they change, then that economic profit may change. But remember, monopoly market structure is completely blocked. Nobody can come in and compete away your profit. All right. So that takes care of monopolist, short run and long run. Now let's go and have a look at the short run for monopolistic competition. Notice this is not monopoly, all right? This is different to monopoly. This is monopolistic competition. What does it look like to start with? Exactly the same as the monopoly. In fact, in the short run, you won't be able to tell the difference. Look at it. In the short run, it looks exactly the same as did your monopoly. Looks exactly the same. What is the difference then? It's in the long run. Because in the long run, your monopolistically competitive firm cannot keep their economic profit. Why is that? Because there are no barriers to entry. Anybody can come in and they will compete away that product, that profit rather. So ladies and gents, let's have a look at what would it look like in the long run for monopolistic competition. Starting position, exactly the same. Look at your starting position, exactly the same. But notice now, look where your AC curve is. And that L is just to signify long run. So you don't have to put it in. I like to put it in because that's what we would do correctly for economics, is we would put it in. And that signifies that this is the long run. And we can only make normal profit in the long run. All right, so hopefully that's a few tips that are going to help you with these graphs. Make this really is what you thought, as long as you pay attention to the technique that you follow with drawing each of them. Your oligopoly market structure does not have any graphs, so you're happy to know that. Also notice that I'm not going on to the long run for a short, for perfect competition. That is a potential question, but it is a difficult question, and I would suggest that you first focus on knowing all of your short run. Know your short runs really well, and then understand in words what happens in the long run. So focus on that first, and then you can worry about, if you've got time, you can focus on the long run graphs, all right? And then NB. They love asking a question on this. Competition policy. And let me tell you, it does not stick. So you've got to find a way to remember this. Yeah, see us under, yeah, you do cover the long run. But as I say, first master the short run. Make sure you know everything there is to know about the short run first. and then look at the long run. Because if you run out of time, you'll be able to answer most of the questions with your short run approach. And most of the marks will be in the short run. Your long run is going to be a lot less marks. And if it's going to hold you back from learning other stuff, then you don't want to waste time on it. All right. So focus first on short run. And then if you, as I say, if you've got time, and if you're aiming for distinctions, then obviously you want to go and have a look at the long run as well in Learning Unit 8 and Learning Unit 9. Please make sure you know all of this stuff. You're going to have to learn it. No shortcuts here, I'm afraid. You just got to learn what the competition policy is and what it does. And then pay attention to the difference between aims and responsible for. What are they asking you? Or institutions. These they often refer to as institutions. What are the institutions that are involved in competition policy? All right. 2 quick questions. Let's see if you can answer question number 1. And let's see if you've got an answer for me. Sorry to have asked earlier about the time. We've slowed down a little bit, so we're obviously going to go on a little bit if necessary. But it's going to take us a bit longer than 12. All right, so who knows the answer to? In a perfectly competitive market, the market price is 50 Rand. If the last unit of output that the firm produced cost the firm 54 Rand, then the firm would maximize profits if it were to. I'm going to give you a moment to think about it, and then I'm going to give you a bit of a clue. Yes, do know your examples of, be able to give an example of a craft union and of an industrial union. Okay. So I'm going to give you some clues here. What is this? This is MR, and this is MC. Remember your rules. Remember your rules. And B is correct. Absolutely. Because what do we know for sure? If MR is less than, because MR is less than MC, then we must definitely decrease output. Why? What is that telling us? Each additional pizza that I sell is adding more to my cost, 54 Rand, to my cost, than it's adding to my revenue, which is only 50 Rand per pizza. So this tells me I'm producing too much. I need to get back to MR is equal to MC, where those are both the same. And so I'm going to decrease my output. Absolutely. There you go. So well done on that one. One more question coming up, which should be a super easy one for you. Notice I haven't spent a lot of time on oligopoly. Please just focus on the theory for oligopoly. Be able to describe the characteristics, know what it looks like, know how they compete. That will be mostly theory because there's not a huge amount of application. But here is one of the questions that quite often has come up on oligopoly. An explicit agreement between producers to limit production, such as OPEC, is called a what and could be or could occur in a what? I've given you a clue, so it has to be D. Absolutely. Cartel, oligopoly. All right. So NB, know your theory for your oligopoly because I haven't spent any time on that. I'm going to zip over that and I'm going to go through to the labor market so that we can. What I'm going to do is it's going to take me about 10 minutes to do the labor market. All right. So what I'm going to do is go through the labor market and then we'll have a break because then you can decide. Because then all we've got left is learning unit 1 and 2. And you can decide then if you want to go or you want to stay. All right. But labor market is important because there's a lot of market. Jason, you're correct. Cartels are not legal. But remember, OPEC is an international cartel. So let me answer these questions now quickly. Cartel is an international, OPEC is an international cartel. And there's no laws that stop international cartels. In South Africa, though, that would be nationally, cartels are illegal. And the Competition Commission is what operates to prevent those cartels. And it investigates. Now, it won't automatically say you're wrong if you create a cartel. What it does is it investigates and it finds out, is it beneficial to the consumer for that and other competitors in the market for that cartel to exist, or is it not beneficial? And if it is not beneficial, then you will be penalized. So many of the cartels that have arisen in South Africa have been penalized because they were not to the advantage of either small competitors in the market or consumers in the market. All right. So from an international perspective, cartels are not really illegal. They can happen. But from a national perspective, they are illegal. In other words, we're not allowed to have them in South Africa. Back to Megan's question. Yes, so the other one was industrial. So Megan, your two unions are a craft union and an industrial union. Your craft is usually things, specific skills. So it'll be like your airline pilots, it'll be your teachers, it will be your police. Those will be examples of your craft, whereas your industrial will be a whole bunch of operators in a particular industry. So your mining industry or your motor industry or your textile industry. That's how it would work. So just check in your textbook because they do give examples for each and be able to give us an actual South African example of a craft union and of an industrial union. All right, labor market, ladies and gents, 20 to 25%. Ouch, a lot of marks coming in there. All right. First of all, you're going to get one of these questions. So what you see in front of you here is definitely going to come up. At least one, maybe two of them. Super straightforward, but learn them. All right. Differences between labor market and goods market. Make sure you learn it. There's about 8, at least. Make sure you know at least 4. You're probably going to pass the question. Requirements for a perfectly competitive labor market. NB, NB, NB. Can you tell us what they are? And don't confuse it with a perfectly competitive goods market. All right. Determinants of market supply. Determinants of market demand. The role of trade unions. And the question you asked just now, the different types of trade unions. And then what makes labor market imperfect? This is all theory. Theory. You just got to learn it. All right. So if I were you, once again, I would make keywords, make a list of these, take keywords and put them there. And just hope that I can remember as much as possible. And then I'd test myself. Can I remember that? Because as I say, you're going to get one of those. And then the most frequently asked questions, longer questions on this section, are to do either with the labor market in a perfectly competitive labor market, or they're going to be trade unions and government intervention. All right. So there are other questions they can ask you, which can be very challenging, but these are the most commonly asked. Your starting position would be equilibrium in your labor market. Make sure you notice your labeling, all right, of your axes, keys. You don't see any P's and Q's, all right? No P's and Q's. I know in the textbook it says quantity of labor. I especially don't do that because I want you to disassociate quantity from this graph, because otherwise you just start talking quantity as though you're in the goods market, and that causes a whole lot of trouble in your explanations, all right? So N is your letter that you use here, and I just use units of labor, or I say to people, you can say number of workers, because then at least you stick also with an N. And then we ask you, what if? What if something happens that changes demand? What if something happens that changes supply? And now you can apply similar rules to what you learned in Learning Unit 3 and 4. What will cause a shift of the demand curve? What will cause a movement along the demand curve for labor? What will cause a shift of the supply curve of labor? What will cause a movement along the supply curve of labor? So ask yourself those questions. Can you answer them? So now we go and check. Are you able to do so? And here we say, nature of the market supply of labor. It's a positive slope. Can you tell me why? Now, think of yourself as supply of labor, and that will help you to answer that question. Why is there a positive relationship between the wage rate and the number of people that work? Simple, because the higher the wage, the more people are prepared to work. The lower the wage, the fewer people are prepared to work. Think of it like that, you'll never get it wrong. All right. And then you've got to work out what will cause a movement along the supply curve for labor, what will cause a shifting of the supply curve for labor. And here I show you, shift, always non-wage. In other words, if you're talking wage, that's going to be a movement along. Shift, non-wage factors. What are those non-wage factors? There they are. That's just some of them. It's not all of them. You may have more that you can add to your list, but learn it properly, because otherwise you're not going to be able to answer the question accurately. All right. And then do the same for demand. Market demand for labor. It's downward sloping. Why? Because firms who are hiring people will hire fewer people when the wage rate is high, and they will hire more people when the wage rate is low. And that will be a movement along your demand curve. And then your change in non-wage factors again, they will all cause a shift of the demand curve. So once again, looking at the movement along and looking at the shift. What is the difference between them and what will cause that to happen? So those are your most frequently asked questions. All right. So let's go and have a look. There's something that happened in one of the exams. This was a super easy one. Interestingly enough, though, students did get a bit confused in it, but it was a super easy question. They actually gave you the graph for the labor market, and then they asked you some questions. So let's go in and have a look and see. What is the equilibrium rate when demand, D1 is the demand curve? So equilibrium wage rate when D1 is the demand curve, no tricks there at all. Straightforward question, 120. And you don't have any additional information. If they give you per hour or per day or whatever, then you can give us that additional information. Otherwise, you just tell us 120 where the market is in equilibrium. If they ask you for more information, like a 3-mark question, then just describe what does equilibrium mean. It is where the quantity of labor demanded is equal to the quantity of labor supplied, which in this case would be 80 units of labor, all right? Then the next one says, keeping D1, explain what the situation would be if the wage rate is 90 Rand. So now we're still on D1. Supply is still ceteris paribus supply, but now we're looking at a wage rate of 90. So can anybody please tell me what is the situation that has arisen when the wage rate is 90? Just checking if there's anybody there that still, you might all just be busy doing other stuff, hoping the recording will continue, which it will. But in case anybody is there. So now, Taylor, if you want to go there, which you're perfectly entitled to do, you must talk quantity demanded. But the quantity demanded, in fact, if you look here, the quantity demanded moving along that line has in fact increased. So be careful, because we're still on D1. So read the question carefully. It says, keeping D1, explain what the situation would be if the wage rate is 90. So we're still on D1, but now we're looking at what the situation is with the wage rate of 90. So quantity of labor demanded would be increasing. All right, but that's not the full answer. What do we want to see? What's the next one? Quantity demanded increases, movement along the D curve, absolutely, but there's something even more important. Is there anybody that's got that answer for me? And this is what we picked up. Students were very confused when they were answering these questions. What is it that we were looking for? So now I'm going to give you a few clues. You don't have to answer me in the chat, all right? There we go. That's exactly where I was going. Kiara, well done. Causes a disequilibrium. Absolutely, because we're no longer at equilibrium. Can you tell me what kind of disequilibrium that is? What kind of disequilibrium are we looking at? Excess demand. Hallelujah. You got it, ladies and gents. Those of you who could answer that question, well done. It's a disequilibrium situation, and it is excess demand for labor. We just got to put in that for labor just to show that we know that we're in the labor market. So we would say an excess demand for labor. Absolutely. And that was where the students went wrong. They got super confused and didn't know how to answer it. All right, let's go and have a look at the last one. What would cause the shift from D1 to DO? From D1 to DO, decrease in demand for labor. What could have caused that? Anybody got a suggestion? Absolutely. Easiest answer. Heath, absolutely, without a doubt, the easiest answer that you could give would be a decrease in the number of firms hiring people. Okay, so you can see that could be an easy question, and then you could get a slightly more difficult question. Just read through it quickly before I put the answer onto it. So not super difficult in terms of application, but it's a more complex question because you've got to give me more stuff now. In this case, it's just asked you to graphically illustrate. It hasn't said to explain, so you just had to do the illustration. And if we are looking at the effect on the equilibrium wage and the equilibrium quantity in the labor market, it tells us that there's an increase in the number of workers entering, and that would be an increase in the supply of workers in this particular field. All right, so let's go and have a look. There's what your graph would look like. So you can see your wage rate, you can see your demand and supply, your original equilibrium position, and then you've got your supply curve shifting to the right, showing an increase in the supply of labor, and then you've got your new equilibrium position. So a super easy question, really, but requires a little bit more understanding and application than perhaps if they give you the graph. All right. So there was that one. And then we almost at the end of the section. So I'm just going to push on. Students, this one has come up in about the last 5 exams. I'm thinking they're going to leave it out this year because it's been in too many. But I say that every year and every year it reappears there. So I don't know. I would spend some time learning it if I were you. But please notice that it says individual supply of labor versus market. All right. As soon as you see market, then I don't want to see this graph. Only if they say individual, then we see this graph, all right? Firms' demand for labor, 2 things I want you to know. Now, this is a challenging section for many, so I'm giving you the tips here. What you focus on. Focus on the word derived. Make sure you can tell me why it's a derived demand. And then look at cost and benefit. What are the costs involved? If you are hiring somebody, what is the cost? Keep it simple. We don't want to go into business management here. All right, we're just keeping it simple. Marginal cost of labor, which is the wage rate. That's how much you're going to pay that person that you hire. The second thing you want to look at is the benefit. What is that person contributing to your organization? What do we call that? Marginal revenue product. So for you here, the challenge is going to be your terminology. All right, because your terminology is going to be what's going to catch you. It's challenging to learn and remember, but you got it. All right. So please, that's what you focus on. And that's what I want you to focus on here as well. It's not so much the calculations. They are important, but what's even more important is that terminology. Don't let that terminology throw you. Make sure that you understand it. Your concepts you've already learned, because this is very similar to everything else that you've learned in relation to total, to marginal, and to average. But it's different in this context in terms of what we call it, all right? And that's why I say terminology, terminology, terminology is what's going to save you there. Oh, well done, Nathan. You got back in. Looking at your graphs, this is the one that's most important, I think, mostly is this one here, is your actual labor market. Very rarely do they actually ask you to draw the graph for the firm in the labor market, but it's not impossible. All right, so we've got to cover it, especially since this section counts for so many marks. So we just want to make sure that you would be able to at least draw this one correctly, and then hopefully you could transition to being able to draw the firm in the labor market. All right, so let's have a look. What do we need to know? What does the supply curve of labor look like in a perfectly competitive labor market? You and me, we're on that side. What does it actually mean? It means that we are wage takers. Super important to pick that up. All right, wage takers. We have to accept the wage that is determined in the labor market. The demand curve looks different though. It's a normal downward sloping demand curve because this is the firm, and the firm is deciding how many workers they're going to hire at that wage rate. So if the wage rate is at WE, that is where that red line is, then in this particular case, we will hire where those two intersect. And that will tell me the number of workers that I'm going to hire in this particular market. All right, so that is your final equilibrium position. So in front of you here, you have your last two equilibrium positions that you learned in Economics 1A. Equilibrium in the labor market and equilibrium of the firm in the labor market. And that's the only reason really why I've covered this graph, is because it helps you to understand the equilibrium of the firm. And of course, then that will need you to be able to describe in words. So be sure, can you describe the equilibrium in the labor market? Quantity of labor demanded is equal to the quantity of labor supplied. And then can you describe equilibrium in the firm? It is simply where MRP, your demand or quantity demanded, is equal to the wage rate. That is how you describe your equilibrium in the firm in the labor market. All right. So there you have it. There are your last two equilibrium positions for PMIC. Take a quick note of those, and then we can complete this learning unit, and I'll talk to you. All right. Intervention in the labor market. What if they ask you? Describe the role of trade unions. One, that will be theory, so that you're not going to necessarily show me in the graph. But then question two, how can trade unions intervene in a labor market? Now, can anybody tell me, there are three ways that you have learned that trade unions can intervene. Can anybody tell me what they are? Or at least give me one or two of those three. Anybody tell me, how can trade unions intervene in this labor market? Mostly they're trying to increase the wages, but how can they do that? Anybody know? Absolutely, collective bargaining, correct, would be a good starting point. And that is part of the role of trade unions as well. But now if we want to go and show how they can intervene, this is what I would want you to be thinking. All right. There's your three ways that they could intervene. Limit the supply of labor in an industry, implement a minimum wage in an industry, encourage an increase of demand for labor in an industry. And the reason that I've got the graph here is because you could potentially have to illustrate one or two or even three of those different ways on a graph. All right, so important both to be able to explain those ways. Collective bargaining would have been where I would start, Kiara, so you are quite correct. Collective bargaining is the role of trade unions, and through process of collective bargaining, it is possible for trade unions to do the following. And then I would go in and give the three ways in which they could, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to increase the wages. So you've got to be able to explain each of those three ways in which they can intervene in the market. All right, so please make sure you can do that. I'm not going to do it with you now. I was just showing you your starting position and then making sure that I warn you that you need to be able to do that, because that's easy questions they can ask you. And you can see you just using the same graph. Two things missing here, obviously. Very naughty of me. Is, of course, here is your wage rate. Don't forget that. And here is your N, which is your units of labor. All right, you always got to put in your axes, label your axes, otherwise you get into trouble when you are doing your graphs. All right. Okay. All right, Nathan. Cheers. All right, ladies and gents, we're almost at the end. Here we go. Government intervention in the labor market, that is the only one. All right, just learn it. When government intervenes, they put in a minimum wage, and that will result in an increase in unemployment. All right, so NB, ladies and gents, and I do believe that this is the end of Learning Unit 10. Well done for those of you who have survived this long. Now, my question to you, revision for the rest, question mark. Do you want to go on a 10-minute break now, and then we can come back and finish? Do you want to continue? So if I can have a little bit of a vote here. All right, so shall we take a 10-minute break, and then I'm here until whenever, and then we'll finish. It'll take us probably about another 15, 20 minutes to finish. Brilliant. 10 minutes on break. Let's see, what is it, 12:11. So we'll be back. Break. I'm going to say for 10 minutes. Then, if you've got questions, I'm still around, so you can always ask them. All right, see you now. All right, we're back. Last little bit of kind of about 10 slides, maybe. And some of them are just resource slides and kind of pep talk. So a little bit of more work to do. You're all ready? Deep breath. Let's get this done. And then you've done quite a lot of revision, ladies and gents. So at least it can contribute to that time you need to spend on preparing for that exam. Alrighty, let's go see. PPC. What must you know about your PPC? Listen, it doesn't often come up in the final exam, but it's not impossible. It has in the past. And then they've asked students to draw it, or they've asked them to explain or describe or answer some other questions on it. Sometimes they give it to you and then ask you questions on it. All right. So a little bit of NB stuff that you should know. Make sure you can describe it. And then make sure you can draw the graph and you can interpret the graph. All right, so it's nice, easy marks. It is what you got, I think, if I remember rightly, in test 1. And it was a saving grace for many students because they were able to get their marks for it. So it could once again be. And you shouldn't have to spend a lot of time on it because you should still remember it. Here would be a little question, if you could have a look at that and then see. Just want to see if I've got any. Yeah, there's your questions. So those would be your scenario. That's your scenario. And then your 2 questions. So have a look at them, and then we'll go in and see what you would do to answer them. All right, so we want to pay attention to some of the information here. Vegetables. This is a naughty thing in the question. They should have said all the resources, but we'll ignore that for now. It's not critical. If the country produces only fruit, 8,000 kg. So that tells us our intercepts, remember, produces only vegetables, 12,000 kg. So those are our intercepts on our axes. And then an important bit of information, it initially produces mainly vegetables. All right, so your initial starting point has to be with vegetables. I'm not going to go and describe the production possibility curve because we did that on the previous slide. We're going to use the information to draw the PPF for this economy. All right, so let's go and have a look what it would look like. So there comes my, ignore the question 2 answer there. I should have taken it out. Describe the PPC. I've given you the answer there. And now what we want to do is we want to go and put in the axes. So vegetables, fruit. If I remember rightly, I don't think it gave us a specific instruction, but always pay attention. Has it told you what to put on what axes? In this case, we're just putting them where I believe they should be. And then we go in vegetables. What was our number for vegetables? That was 12,000. What was our number for fruit? That was 8,000. And then we just join those 2 together. So there's my PPC. So first step we've done. But now what we've got to do is we've got to show where we would be if we were producing mainly, I think it said mainly vegetables, all right? So let's go and put a mainly vegetables. It doesn't really matter where you put it. It just, you want to show that there's more vegetables than fruit. So you want to stay in a vicinity that is going to show you that there's more vegetables, all right? That means that you could have put it in a few different spots. So, I mean, you could have put it anywhere along this line. You could have even put it here, although it does not say only. So I would have stayed off the axis and I would have put it somewhere along there. If you get here, then you're not showing correctly because now you're showing that it's mainly fruit. All right, so be careful of little things like that that could cost you. And then in question 2, I'm going to zip back quickly so I can remember what did question 2 say. And then we'll just do that. Describe what will happen if the people in this economy decide to produce more fruit. Indicate the change on the diagram and explain what is being illustrated. All right, so let's get back to our position. There's our position. So now we want to show the position, a change in our graph. So there we're going to go into producing now more fruit. And what does that mean? Now, remember, it was for 3 marks, so you want to give me additional information. Now, this is not the only way that you have to answer this question, but it is a good way to answer the question. There will be a movement along the PPC. So there we see a movement from A through to B, so a movement along the PPC as the community reallocates resources from producing vegetables to producing fruit. So now that shows me that you actually understand what's happening. And then this will indicate the opportunity cost of this choice. We can't say what the opportunity cost is because we don't have enough information. But we know that that change will be representing an opportunity cost. All right. So you want to give me something that shows that you're able to link that to opportunity cost. Right. So that's a possible question that you could get for your PPC. But as I said, doesn't often come up in the exams, but it's easy marks if it does. Do you know the difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics, positive and normative, stocks and flows, rates and levels? They're going to ask you something on this. All right, either in the MCQs or in the distinguish between. So once again, what you learned for test 1, still important for that final exam. Do you remember that economics is a social science? And could you describe to us, what does that mean? What does it mean if economics is a social science, or if economics is a science? Are you able to give me some additional information? If it's just for 2 marks, it's super easy. You can just say it studies the behavior of human beings individually and as groups. But what if it's asked for 5 marks? Now you've got to give me more information. All right. So be sure that you know enough to be able to get at least half the marks, if not more, for that sort of question. Don't confuse the 3s. 3 economic concepts, 3 central questions, 3 economic systems, 3 basic economic systems. There's actually 4 that we talk about, but there's 3 basic. So let's put that word in there because that's important. We should remember that it's basic. So this should be 3 basic economic systems. In B. 3 major flows, 3 participants in a closed economy. These are all super easy questions, which incidentally, when we're marking sometimes that final exam, students can't answer. And we cannot understand why. Because this is basic information. We would have thought that at least you would know these. So please don't get caught with them. All right. So let's have a look. What are the answers to each of these? 3 key concepts. Scarcity, choice, opportunity cost. 3 central questions. What to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce. 3 basic economic systems, traditional, command, market. And then remember, there's also mixed, but mixed is a combination of all of those 3, or has elements of all of those 3. 3 major flows, production, income, spending. 3 participants in a closed economy, households, firms, government. All right, so this is stuff that I want you just to watch out. You may think that you still remember, but you need to test yourself. Go back to something that you've got. See if you can draw a mind map. See if you can memorize, if you've remembered correctly. Do something to test. What do I remember about this information? All right. Otherwise, you could get caught short in that exam. And if you take Learning Unit 1, 2, 3, 4 all together, you'll see it's quite a lot of marks. If you take each of them separately, they're not that many marks. But if you do a cumulative, there's quite a lot of marks there. All right, question number 1. Have a look at it, see if you could answer it. And then I'll show you what the answer is. If anybody wants to give me an answer, that's great, you can. But otherwise, I'm going to show you in a minute or 2. So question number 1. You don't have to explain. You could just tell me more or less very briefly what you would do there. All right, let's show you the answer. There you go. Change in the level is 15. That is simply the difference between the two amounts, 300 to 315. The rate of change, remember, is a calculation of the percentage change. And there you've got to go new minus old, divide by old, times by 100. All right, so just be sure, because this is a sneaky question. It comes up often, and then students bomb out on it. But it's easy marks if you can get it correct. List the three basic economic concepts which can be explained by the Production Possibility Frontier Model, or the PPC. And those are, of course, scarcity choice and opportunity cost. And then name the three basic economic systems which can be used to answer the three central economic questions. Notice we don't want the questions here, we just want the systems, and that is, of course, what we've already looked at. All right, so some of the actual questions which came out of previous exam papers. Another two questions, list the four factors of production and the income earned by each, super easy question. And then describe the conditions for a market to exist. They loved this question. It was in your test 2, and the chances are, no, it was in your test 1, sorry, apologies, and it's quite likely to be in the exam again. So it comes up over and over and over again. All right, so please make sure you can answer all of these questions, super easy ones, if they do come up in that final exam. All right, those were super easy questions, ladies and gents, but what I was trying to illustrate for you here is that if you haven't revised your memory, or refreshed your memory, actually is a better word, if you haven't refreshed your memory, these might not be there. And that's going to be silly because you think you know them, and then you discover, oops, I didn't know that. All right, do you remember your circular flow model? Would you be able to identify the different flows? Do you remember what they do and the significance of them? Do you remember that households own all the factors of production and they sell those factors of production to the firms? The firms use the factors of production to produce goods and services which they sell to the households. Make note of what goes through what market so that you don't get yourself into trouble. Super easy stuff, but you've got to have looked at it and reminded yourself of what's what. So some questions that can come from this, once again, they're very unlikely to ask you to draw it, but they can give you the diagram and then ask you questions on it. Let's have a look. Name the three components of total spending in the economic circular flow model. What makes up the income flow in the economy? And list the main participants in an open economy. All right, so let's go and have a look at these questions and see, would you have been able to answer them correctly? Let's take a look. Look at the first one, main components of total spending. Notice we say total spending here. Look how we describe it. Consumption spending by households, investment spending by firms, government spending, receipt for exports, payment for imports. Now, you may have remembered that, but you might have said to me households, or you might have said consumption, investment, government, foreign sector. Do you notice the difference between answering that question and answering this question? Main participants in an open economy. Households, firms, government, foreign sector. All right. These essentially are dealing with the same things, but the question was asked in a very specific way. Be careful. All right. And then, of course, your income. Do you know your income flows? What makes up, or the components of your income flow? What makes up income in the economic circular flow model? Wages, which is the return for labor, rent, the return for land, interest for capital, and profit for entrepreneurship. All right. Just checking, ladies and gents, just give me a thumbs up if everything's still working. Okay, good. All right, because it looked like it had all frozen on the side. Brilliant. Okie dokes. Almost done. Oh, we are done. There's your final message, folks. Well done for those of you. Remember, walk the talk as a study. Thanks, Jason. Absolutely. God bless you all. And very best wishes for you all. I know you can ace this. All right. Don't make us all proud. And yourselves too, most important. Thanks, ladies and gents. Only a pleasure. Take care. All right, answer to two questions. Matthew, I can't tell you an exact time. I'm hoping it'll be later on this afternoon. We'll try and get it out to everybody ASAP. All right. So I just can't promise you, especially since Monday is a public holiday. But I think most of your lecturers will be waiting for the link and then they will put it through once it comes through to them. So hopefully it'll be by this evening. So fingers crossed. All right. I just can't promise. And then I go to Heath. Heath, you've got two questions. You have a question. What are the two main rules of firms? Just give me a little bit of content. I think I know what you're talking about. I mean, I know what I want to tell you, but I just want you to just make sure you're asking me the right question. So can you just give me a little bit more so that I can answer that for you? Okay, so it is learning unit 7. All right, so I got you there. That's what I thought it was. Okay, so your two main rules. Now, there's different ways we can talk about it, but the way that I've taught it to you, and then just be careful it doesn't conflict with any other information you've got, so we can get clarity on it, is I've taught you to separate what we call the output rules. Output rules and profit rules. Right, so that's the first thing. I talk about the output rules and then the profit rules. If we go to the output rules, that what we're saying is how does a firm determine how much they're going to produce? There's two rules there. So your output rules, they are shut down and your profit maximizing. Those are your two output rules. Now, those two are really, really important. Your shutdown rule is not very often tested, but your profit maximizing rule you use all the time because that is your equilibrium for your firm in all market structures, and it is where MR is equal to MC. All right, so you've got to know all the rules, but the one that we use most is your profit maximizing rule, and that is your MR is equal to MC. All right. Then your profit rules, these tell you how much profit you're making. And this is AR is greater than AC, or AR is equal to AC, or AR is less than AC. And that is AC or ATC, all right? Remember, they're both the same. There you've got, those are your profit rules. So if you can somehow separate all of those, now that doesn't really relate to Learning Unit 7. It relates to Learning Unit 8. But we introduce you very briefly to that information in Learning Unit 7. And then we carry it on in much more detail in Learning Unit 8. All right. So if those are the rules that you were talking about, then watch out for that. If you were thinking of the rules in Learning Unit 7, that was with your total product, your marginal product, and your average product. All right. Those are very different. That is a whole different story in terms of that. And if that's what you're talking to, then this is what we're looking for. So remember the rules in All right. So did you get those rules? The rules that we spoke about in Learning Unit 7, which referred mostly to TP, AP, and MP. Did you get those? There were 4 of them. Okay, there you go. So just be clear on those different rules because you can see there's rules in every single learning unit. And you've got to be very careful when you're talking rules or you're answering a question on rules, which ones are they asking for? And you'll always have your clues in your question. So look for specific information and be very clear when you learn a rule, where does it apply? So that you don't go and just be so excited because you see the word rule and the rule that you know is the profit rule. And that's the one that you're going to use because you just think you know it. All right. So just be careful of that. Anything else? Does that help you or is there anything else that you wanted to check? Great. Good luck, eh? All right, folks, I'm going to end. If that is the end, everybody done, I'm going to end the meeting now. Say goodbye and good luck. All right, and I hope we can get these to you ASAP. Going to stop sharing and stop recording.